I never imagined my father-in-law's 70th birthday party would end with blood on marble floors and my marriage hanging by a thread. The crystal glass slipped from my trembling fingers as I reached across the table, burgundy wine splashing across Richard's pristine white dress shirt. His fist connected with my face before anyone could react. Through the ringing in my ears and metallic taste flooding my mouth, I heard my husband Jake's voice cut through the gasps. "Apologize to him, Alesia. Now! Or get out." The Harrison family represented everything people admired about American success. At least that's what everyone believed when they saw us at the Willowbrook Country Club or read about Harrison Industries in the financial pages. For 5 years, I'd played my part in this elaborate performance, smiling through charity galas and polo matches, pretending not to notice how my husband's family looked at me like I'd tracked mud through their pristine world. My name is Alesia, and I'm 29 years old. I grew up in a modest 2-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, where my parents taught 5th grade and coached Little League. We weren't poor, but we shopped sales and clipped coupons. I worked my way through nursing school with scholarships and double shifts at a diner. The day I graduated and became a pediatric nurse was the proudest moment of my parents' lives. Meeting Jake Harrison felt like stepping into a different universe. He was completing his MBA at Ohio State while I was finishing my nursing degree. We met at a coffee shop where I was studying for finals, and he was charming the barista into making his complicated order. He had this easy confidence that drew people in the kind that comes from never having to worry about student loans or rent money. "You look like you could use a break," he'd said, sliding into the seat across from me without asking. That should have been my first warning sign, but his smile was warm and his eyes were kind. We talked for 3 hours that night, and by the time I realized I'd barely studied, I didn't care. Jake pursued me with the same intensity he applied to everything else in his life. Flowers delivered to the hospital, surprise weekend trips to Chicago, fancy dinners at places where the appetizers cost more than my weekly grocery budget. My friends warned me about the differences between us, but I was 24 and in love with this golden boy who said I made him want to be better than his family's expectations. The problem started the moment I met Richard Harrison. Jake had been dating me for 6 months before he finally introduced me to his parents at their sprawling estate in Upper Arlington. Richard took one look at my department store dress and dismissed me before I'd even spoken. Throughout dinner, he grilled me about my family, my education, my career aspirations with quotation marks you could hear in his voice. "A nurse," he'd said, swirling his bourbon. "How noble, though I suppose someone needs to do those jobs." Jake squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing. That became our pattern. Richard would make cutting remarks about my quaint middle-class values, or a joke about how I must be amazed by real silverware, and Jake would offer silent comfort, but never confrontation. His mother, Patricia, was different, at least at first. She'd smile at me with what seemed like genuine warmth, asking about my work with sick children and complimenting my composure in the face of her husband's barbs. But she never spoke up either, just watched with sad eyes as Richard held court over every family gathering. The wedding should have been my moment of acceptance into the family. Instead, it became a masterclass in subtle humiliation. Richard insisted on paying for everything, then overrode every choice I made. My simple garden ceremony became a 500-guest spectacle. My mother's offer to make her famous lemon cake was rejected in favor of a 7-tier monstrosity from the city's most exclusive bakery. My childhood friends were seated in the back, while Richard's business associates filled the front rows. "Don't take it personally," Jake had said when I cried in the bathroom at our own reception. "Dad just wants everything to be perfect." Perfect for whom I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. As the years passed, I learned to navigate the Harrison family dynamics like a skilled sailor reading dangerous currents. I memorized which topics were safe at dinner parties and which would earn Richard's scorn. I learned to dress in the understated, expensive style Patricia favored, though nothing I wore ever quite met Richard's standards. I smiled through his jokes about my nursing hobby and bit my tongue when he suggested I quit to focus on more appropriate charitable work. Jake changed gradually, so slowly I almost didn't notice. The man who'd once defended my choice to keep working became someone who'd suggest I consider part-time hours. The partner who'd loved my independence started making comments about how other wives in his circle didn't need careers. He began echoing his father's opinions about everything from politics to restaurant choices, as if Richard's voice was slowly replacing his own. Our apartment, once filled with laughter and takeout dinners on the couch, became a showcase that looked like a magazine spread. Jake insisted we needed to entertain properly and hired a decorator who stripped away everything personal. My grandmother's quilt was relegated to a closet deemed too homespun for our new aesthetic. The country club became my prison of politeness. Every Sunday, we'd have brunch with Richard and Patricia, where I'd listen to Richard hold forth on everything wrong with society, while Patricia picked at her egg whites and Jake nodded along. The other wives would discuss their tennis games and fundraisers, while I tried not to think about the premature babies I'd cared for during my Saturday night shift. You look tired, dear," Richard would observe with a false concern. "Perhaps those long hours are too much. Jake shouldn't have a wife who looks exhausted all the time." I'd force a smile and claim I was fine while Jake would promise to talk to me about my schedule. Those talks never went well. They always ended with Jake reminding me that his salary could support us both, that I was being stubborn, that I needed to think about our future children and what kind of mother I wanted to be. Children, that was another battlefield. Richard made it clear he expected heirs to the Harrison legacy, preferably sons who could carry on the family business. Every family gathering included pointed questions about when we'd be giving them grandchildren, and observations about my biological clock. What none of them knew was that I'd been trying to conceive for 2 years. The fertility tests showed nothing wrong with either of us, but stress, the doctors said, could impact fertility. How could I explain that every negative pregnancy test felt like another failure in Richard's eyes, another mark against my worthiness as a Harrison? This morning, everything changed. I'd been feeling nauseated for a week, exhausted in a way that felt different from my usual post-shift fatigue. The test showed 2 pink lines, clear and undeniable. Pregnant. 8 weeks along, according to my calculations. I sat on our bathroom floor holding that plastic stick and crying tears I couldn't quite name. Joy mixed with fear, hope tangled with dread. A baby. Jake's baby. Richard's grandchild. A new person who would be born into this gleaming, suffocating world. I'd planned to tell Jake privately first, but when he'd rushed out this morning for an emergency meeting with his father, I'd made a different decision. Tonight, at Richard's 70th birthday party, I'd announce our pregnancy. Surely even Richard couldn't find fault with such news. Maybe this baby would be the bridge between his world and mine, the proof that I belonged in the Harrison family after all. How naive I was. How desperately I'd clung to the hope that love could overcome contempt, that a grandchild could soften a heart that had calcified long ago. As I prepared for the party, choosing a dress that wouldn't show my still flat stomach and practicing my announcement in the mirror, I had no idea that within hours everything would shatter. The morning sickness had been particularly bad today, waves of nausea that left me shaky and pale, but I'd pushed through, telling myself it would all be worth it when I saw Jake's face light up at the news, when Richard finally accepted me as the mother of his grandchild. When Patricia could openly show me the affection I sometimes glimpsed in her eyes. I should have known better. 5 years of small humiliation should have taught me that the Harrisons didn't change. They absorbed others into their orbit or destroyed them. There was no middle ground, no room for someone who didn't quite fit their mold. As I drove to the estate that evening, my hand unconsciously resting on my stomach, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. I just had no idea how catastrophically right I was. The Harrison estate stood like a monument to old money and older grudges, its colonial facade hiding secrets that pressed against the walls like trapped spirits. I arrived early that morning to help Patricia prepare for Richard's birthday celebration, parking my modest Honda between Jake's BMW and a catering van that probably cost more than my annual salary. Patricia greeted me at the door with her usual practiced smile, though I noticed the way her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her pearl necklace. She wore a cream-colored dress that hung a bit too loose on her frame, as if she'd lost weight recently. Her makeup was flawless as always, but no amount of concealer could quite hide the shadows under her eyes. "Alesia, darling, thank you for coming early," she said, air-kissing my cheek with the precision of someone who'd perfected the gesture without actual contact. "The caterers need supervision, and you know how particular Richard is about everything." I followed her through the marble foyer, our heels clicking in rhythm against the imported Italian tile. The house smelled of fresh flowers and furniture polish, every surface gleaming with the kind of perfection that required an army of staff to maintain. Patricia led me to the kitchen where chaos reigned despite the professional efficiency of the catering team. "The ice sculpture hasn't arrived," Patricia fretted, checking her list for the dozenth time. "Richard specifically wanted the company logo carved in ice. He'll be furious if it's not perfect." I watched her flutter between tasks, noticing how she favored her left wrist when lifting anything. The morning light streaming through the windows caught her at just the right angle, and I saw it, a fading bruise wrapped around her wrist, like a bracelet of purple and yellow. "Patricia, your wrist." I started reaching out instinctively with my nurse's concern. She jerked away as if I'd burned her, quickly pulling down her sleeve. "Just a silly accident. I caught it in the car door last week. You know how clumsy I can be?" But I'd seen too many accidents in the emergency room to believe her easy lie. The bruise pattern was distinct, 4 finger marks on one side, a thumbprint on the other. Someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks that lasted over a week. "Patricia," I said softly, "if you need to talk." Her composure cracked for just a moment, tears welling in her carefully made-up eyes. She glanced toward the door, then pulled me into the pantry, closing the door behind us. In the dim light between shelves of gourmet ingredients, she finally let her mask slip. "You can't say anything," she whispered urgently. "Promise me, Alesia, not to Jake, not to anyone. But if someone hurts you, it's not what you think." The lie came automatically, even as tears tracked mascara down her cheeks. "Richard's been under so much stress since retirement. He didn't mean to. He just grabbed me too hard during an argument. It's nothing." Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. Richard's volatile moods, Patricia's nervous movements, the way she always positioned herself out of his reach at family dinners. My stomach turned to morning sickness, mixing with disgust. "How long?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Patricia laughed bitterly, a sound like breaking crystal. "How long has the sky been blue? How long have the Harrisons ruled this part of Columbus? Some things just are, Alesia. We learn to live with them." "You don't have to live with abuse," I said, my nurse's training overriding my family politics. "There are resources, shelters, lawyers who specialize in—" "Stop." Patricia's voice turned sharp. "You think I haven't considered every option. You think I don't know what leaving would mean. Richard owns everything. The house, the accounts, even my family's connections all run through his business. I'm trapped in golden handcuffs, and now you are too." She wiped her tears with expensive tissues from her pocket, repairing her makeup with practiced efficiency. "Besides, it's not that bad. He's only physical when he drinks too much, and I've learned what sets him off, as long as I'm careful." "Patricia, no one should have to live like that." She gripped my shoulders, her fingers surprisingly strong. "Promise me you won't tell Jake. He idolizes his father, always has. It would destroy him to know, and Richard would make our lives hell. Promise me." Against every instinct, I nodded. Another secret to add to my growing collection, another weight on my chest. Patricia composed herself, and we returned to the kitchen, pretending nothing had happened. An hour later, Jake arrived, stress radiating from him like heat waves. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew. He barely acknowledged me, moving straight to the coffee pot and downing a cup like medicine. "Rough morning?" I asked, trying to catch his eye. "Dad's pushing me to close the Meridian deal by Monday. Says I'm too soft, taking too long with due diligence." He rubbed his temples, a gesture I'd been seeing more frequently. Sometimes I think nothing I do will ever be good enough for him. The irony of his words, spoken in the same kitchen where his mother had just revealed years of abuse, made me want to scream. Instead, I touched his arm gently. "Jake, we need to talk. About your father, about—" "Not now, Alesia." He shrugged off my touch, already scrolling through emails on his phone. "Tonight's about Dad. Everything else can wait." "Everything else, is that what our marriage is?" He finally looked at me then, and for a moment I saw the man I'd fallen in love with buried under layers of Harrison expectations. But the moment passed and his expression hardened. "Don't be dramatic. You know how important tonight is. Dad's invited half of Columbus's business elite. We need to present a united front, show them the Harrison family is stronger than ever." United front. I repeated, thinking of Patricia's bruises, of my secret pregnancy, of all the ways we were fracturing beneath our polished surface. Right. Jake was already moving on barking orders at the catering staff with an authority that mimicked his father's. I watched him stride through the house, transforming more into Richard with every passing moment. When had my gentle, thoughtful husband become this stressed, dismissive stranger? The party preparations continued around me in a blur of activity. Florists arrived with arrangements of white orchids and roses, each one costing more than most people's weekly groceries. The string quartet set up in the conservatory, tuning their instruments with mathematical precision. Staff polished silver and crystal until everything gleamed like weapons waiting to draw blood. I found myself in the study helping Patricia arrange photo displays of Richard's life and achievements. Pictures of him with senators and CEOs receiving awards and cutting ribbons. In every photo, his smile looked more like a predator's grin, calculating and cold. "He was handsome once," Patricia said softly, touching a photo from their wedding day. "Charming, too. He could make you feel like the only person in the world who mattered." By the time I realized it was all performance, I was already pregnant with Jake. "People can change," I offered weakly. "No," she said with quiet certainty. "They just reveal who they always were. The money and power just made it easier for Richard to stop pretending." A delivery arrived, and Patricia excused herself to handle it. Alone in the study, I looked at the family photos covering one wall. Jake through the years, transforming from a gap-toothed boy to the man I married. His sister Emma, whose pictures stopped appearing after she came out in college. The family portrait from last Christmas, all of us arranged like a magazine spread with empty smiles. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Thinking of you tonight, sweetheart. Remember, you're stronger than you know." If only she knew how much I'd need that strength in the hours to come. The caterers called for Patricia, something about the cocktail garnishes not meeting specifications. I volunteered to handle it, grateful for the distraction from my churning thoughts. The kitchen had transformed into a military operation, with the head chef barking orders like a general preparing for battle. I was approving the final menu selections when Emma arrived through the back door, dressed in a sharp pantsuit that would undoubtedly irritate her father. She'd cut her hair shorter since I'd last seen her at Christmas, and there was a new confidence in her stride. "Alesia." She hugged me warmly, one of the few genuine gestures of affection I'd received all day. "How are you surviving the birthday preparation madness?" "One crisis at a time," I said, returning her embrace. Your mother's in the study if you're looking for her. Emma's expression darkened. I'm actually hoping to avoid dear old dad as long as possible. Is he here yet? Not yet. Jake said he had meetings this morning. Meetings? Emma snorted. Is that what they're calling them now? Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. Emma, what's going on? She glanced around, then pulled me onto the terrace where we could speak privately. The morning had grown warm with the kind of humidity that promised afternoon storms. I've been doing some digging into Dad's business dealings, she said quietly. My girlfriend Maria is a forensic accountant, and she noticed some irregularities in the public filings for Harrison Industries. What kind of irregularities? The kind that could land someone in federal prison, Emma's jaw tightened. Pension funds that don't add up, offshore accounts in the Caymans, a web of shell companies that all lead back to Dad. He's been stealing from his own employees for years. My knees felt weak. I sank onto a garden bench, trying to process this new information. Have you told anyone else? Not yet. I wanted more proof first, but Maria thinks we have enough to take to the authorities. Emma sat beside me, her expression fierce. I'm going to confront him tonight after the party. He's destroyed enough lives. It ends now. Emma, be careful. Your father, Patricia showed me bruises. I know. Emma's voice was flat. I've known for years. Why do you think I stayed in California? Why do you think Mom never visits me there? He can't control what he can't reach. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the party staff arrange tables on the lawn. Everything looked so perfect, so elegant, like a movie set waiting for the cameras to roll, but underneath the surface rot spread through every foundation. There's something else, Emma said finally. Jake knows. About the financial crimes, I mean. Dad's been grooming him to take over everything, including the illegal parts. Your husband isn't just complicit, Alesia. He's an active participant. The morning sickness returned with a vengeance. I barely made it to the garden bed before losing my breakfast. Emma holding my hair back with sisterly concern. Are you okay? She asked, handing me a tissue. I wanted to tell her about the pregnancy, about my foolish hope that a baby could somehow fix this toxic family. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I bring a child into this nightmare? I'll be fine. I lied, the taste of bile mixing with my growing dread. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of preparations and revelations. Every smile felt like a mask, every conversation like a performance. The estate filled with flowers and food and staff, all the trappings of a perfect celebration for a man who deserved none of it. As the afternoon approached and the first guests began arriving, I stood in the powder room staring at my reflection. My dress was appropriate, my makeup flawless, my expression carefully neutral. I looked exactly like what Richard expected, a proper Harrison wife. But underneath, rebellion stirred. The bruises on Patricia's wrist, Emma's evidence of crimes, Jake's transformation into his father's puppet, all of it churned inside me like a storm building strength. I pressed my hand to my stomach, thinking of the tiny life growing there. I promise, I whispered to my unborn child, I won't let them break us the way they've broken everyone else. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The party planners scrambled to move arrangements indoors, their careful preparations disrupted by forces beyond their control. If only I'd recognized the omen for what it was. The Harrison estate transformed as guests arrived, expensive cars creating a parade of wealth down the circular driveway. I stood at Jake's side in the grand foyer, playing the perfect hostess while storm clouds gathered both outside and within. The rain had stopped, leaving behind oppressive humidity that made the air feel thick enough to chew. Richard held court in the living room, his booming voice carrying over the string quartet's delicate melodies. He'd started drinking early, his face already flushed with bourbon and superiority. Patricia hovered nearby, anticipating his needs with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned that prevention was less painful than correction. Alesia, darling, don't you look Adequate, Richard said as Jake led me over for the obligatory greeting. His eyes scraped over my dress with disapproval, though I suppose we can't all have Patricia's natural elegance. Happy birthday, Richard. I managed the false cheer tasting sour. He'd already turned away, spotting someone more important to impress. Judge Morrison from the state Supreme Court, accompanied by his wife, who clutched her pearls like a lifeline. Richard's ability to dismiss me mid-conversation had become an art form, each snub calculated to remind me of my place in his hierarchy. The guests formed a who's who of Columbus society, bank presidents and heart surgeon state senators and Fortune 500 executives all gathered to pay homage to Richard Harrison on his 70th birthday. They moved through the rooms like schools of expensive fish, their laughter bright and empty as champagne bubbles. I recognized several faces from the country club women who looked through me at Sunday brunches while discussing their charity committees and tennis matches. Tonight, they offered tight smiles and air kisses, their eyes already searching for more valuable connections before finishing their greetings. The pharmaceutical heiress, Jake whispered in my ear, nodding toward a woman dripping in diamonds. Dad needs her husband's vote on the zoning commission. Be charming. Be charming. As if charm could mask the growing revulsion I felt for this entire charade. But I smiled and complimented her dress, made small talk about the weather, and the lovely party played my role while my stomach churned with more than morning sickness. A stir near the entrance caught everyone's attention. Emma had arrived with Maria, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Where Emma's pantsuit had been daring, Maria's cocktail dress was a declaration of war. Deep purple elegant, but clearly chosen to clash with the sea of neutral tones Patricia had requested. The prodigal daughter returns. Richard's voice cut through the quartet's Mozart, and she's brought her friend. The pause before friend landed like a slap. Maria's hand tightened on Emma's arm, but both women kept their heads high as they approached Richard. Emma kissed her father's cheek with the minimum possible contact, a gesture that looked more like a chess move than affection. Happy birthday, Dad, Emma said, her voice steady. You remember Maria. How could I forget? Richard's smile had too many teeth. Though I thought you might have outgrown this phase by now, Emma. You're not in college anymore. 7 years isn't a phase, Maria said quietly. It's a life. The nearby conversations stuttered to a halt, everyone pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. Richard's face darkened, but Patricia appeared at his elbow with practiced timing. Maria, how lovely you look. Patricia intervened, her social graces smooth as silk over broken glass. Emma tells me your firm just landed the Morrison Industries account. How impressive. The deflection worked barely. Richard allowed himself to be distracted by the mayor's arrival, though not before shooting Emma a look that promised future consequences. I watched my sister-in-law navigate the crowd with Maria, noting how some guests subtly shifted away while others made a point of greeting them warmly. Battle lines drawn in passive-aggressive formations. Your sister's testing him tonight, I murmured to Jake. She always does, his jaw tightened. Can't she just play nice for one evening? It's his birthday. She shouldn't have to hide who she is to make him comfortable. Jake turned to me with exasperation. Not everything is a social justice crusade, Alesia. Sometimes keeping peace is more important than making points. Before I could respond, he was pulled away by one of his father's golf buddies wanting to discuss interest rates. I drifted through the party like a ghost, refilling drinks and deflecting personal questions while the undercurrents of family dysfunction swirled beneath the surface. In the library, I found a cluster of Harrison Industries executives deep in conversation. They fell silent as I passed, but not before I caught fragments about federal scrutiny and covering exposure. One of them, CFO Davidson, who'd always reminded me of a nervous ferret, was sweating despite the air conditioning. The caterers announced dinner, and we moved to the formal dining room, where Patricia's planning precision showed in every detail. place cards, positioned guests for maximum strategic value, Richard at the head of the table like a king surveying his realm. I found myself between a pharmaceutical executive who monopolized conversation about his yacht and a senator's wife who spent the entire first course explaining why public schools were destroying America. Richard held forth from his throne, regaling the table with stories of his business conquests. Each tale grew more embellished with every bourbon refill, painting him as a corporate warrior who'd built an empire through sheer force of will. No mention of the employees he'd crushed along the way, or the competitors he'd destroyed through tactics that skirted the edge of legality. Of course, running a successful company requires making hard choices, he declared, gesturing with his steak knife for emphasis. Weak men let emotions cloud their judgment. That's why they stay middle management, while leaders like us make the decisions that matter. Murmurs of agreement rippled down the table from those who knew which side their bread was buttered on. I caught Emma's eye across the table, saw her grip her fork like she was considering an alternate use for it. Speaking of hard choices, Richard continued, his voice taking on that particular tone that meant someone was about to be humiliated. I see my youngest daughter has chosen to test the patience of everyone here tonight. The table went silent. Emma straightened in her chair, Maria's hand finding hers beneath the tablecloth. I wasn't aware that existing required anyone's patience, Emma said evenly. Existing. Richard laughed ugly and sharp. Is that what we're calling this performance? Parading your lifestyle in front of decent people who are too polite to say what they're really thinking? Richatis. Patricia's voice held a warning note that he ignored entirely. No, Patricia, someone needs to say it. I've indulged this rebellion long enough. He pointed his knife at Emma, his face flushing darker. You want to play house with your little friend in California? Fine. But don't bring your deviance into my home and expect me to pretend it's normal. Maria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I think we should go. Sit down, Emma said quietly, steel in her voice. She looked directly at her father. You want to talk about Deviant's dad? Let's talk about the Harrison Industries pension fund. Let's talk about the employees who worked 30 years expecting retirement security only to find empty accounts. The temperature in the room plummeted. Several executives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Richard and Emma like spectators at a tennis match with hand grenades instead of balls. You ungrateful little... Richard started to rise, but Jake intervened. Emma, please, not tonight. My husband's voice held desperation. Whatever issues you have, this isn't the time or place. When is the time, Jake? Emma's composure cracked slightly. When Dad's in federal prison, when more families lose everything, because you and he decided their futures were worth less than a yacht upgrades? That's enough. Richard's fist slammed the table, making Crystal sing and guests flinch. You dare come into my house, eat my food, and make these baseless accusations? As baseless. Emma laughed bitterly. I have spreadsheets, Dad, account numbers. Maria's firm specializes in forensic accounting. Remember, we know exactly where the money went. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the caterers froze mid-motion, sensing the danger in the air. Patricia had gone pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. Richard's voice, when it came, was low and venomous. You always were too smart for your own good, just like your Aunt Catherine. I saw Patricia flinch at the name. Catherine, Richard's sister, who disappeared from family photos and conversations years ago. Another ghost in the Harrison closet? Another person who dared challenge the patriarch and paid an unnamed price. At least Aunt Catherine had the courage to stand up to you, Emma shot back. Where is she now, Dad? Still in that psychiatric facility you had her committed to when she threatened to expose your first embezzlement scheme. Gasps rippled around the table. This was beyond the pale even for Harrison family drama. Secrets spilling like wine across Patricia's perfect tablecloth, staining everything they touched. Get out! Richard's words came out, strained his face, an alarming shade of purple. "Both of you, get out of my house and don't ever come back." Emma stood with dignity intact, helping Mariah to her feet. "I'm not going anywhere until you hear what I have to say, but fine, we'll continue this conversation later, in private, with lawyers present." They left through the French doors to the terrace, Emma's head high, despite the tears I glimpsed in her eyes. The remaining guests sat frozen, unsure whether to pretend nothing had happened or flee the sinking ship of Richard's birthday celebration. "Well," Richard forced a laugh that fooled no one. "Children, they think they know everything at that age. More wine, everyone. Patricia, tell the staff to bring out the Chateau Margaux. Nothing but the best for my friends." Conversations resumed with desperate brightness, everyone working overtime to restore the illusion of normalcy. But the cracks were showing, spreading like spider webs through the facade of Harrison family perfection. Jake excused himself ostensibly to check on his sister, but more likely to do damage control with the executives who looked ready to bolt. I stayed at the table, pushing food around my plate, while the pharmaceutical executive resumed his yacht monologue as if nothing had happened. Through the window, I could see Emma and Maria in the garden holding each other as Emma's shoulders shook. The sight made my heart ache. She'd been brave in a way I hadn't managed to be speaking truth in a house built on lies. "Your sister-in-law always was unstable," the senator's wife confided in a stage whisper. "Patricia told me they had to send her to therapy as a teenager. Clearly, it didn't take." I wanted to throw my wine in her smug face, tell her that the only unstable thing in this family was its foundation of abuse and fraud. Instead, I excused myself to the powder room, needing a moment to breathe. In the hallway, I passed the butler, William, carrying a tray of desserts. He'd worked for the Harrisons for 20 years, a steady presence who'd seen it all. Our eyes met briefly, and I caught something in his expression. Not surprise at the evening's revelations, but a grim satisfaction, as if he'd been waiting for someone to finally say what he'd been forced to witness in silence. The powder room door locked behind me with a soft click, shutting out the noise and pretense. I leaned against the sink, studying my reflection in the gilt mirror. My makeup remained perfect, my dress unrumpled, but my eyes looked hollow, the face of a woman realizing she'd married into a crime family with better table manners. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, but it had to be said. Be careful tonight. Dad's not done punishing people." A knock on the door interrupted my response. "Just a moment." I called, splashing cold water on my wrists to calm my nerves. When I emerged, Patricia stood in the hallway looking like she'd aged a decade in the past hour. "Are you feeling all right, dear? You look pale." "I'm fine." I lied, wondering if she knew about the pregnancy, if mothers had a sixth sense for these things. "No, you're not." She touched my arm gently, her bruised wrist, visible where her sleeve had ridden up. "None of us are fine. We just pretend better than most." She glided back to the party before I could respond, resuming her role as the perfect hostess to a man who didn't deserve her devotion. I followed more slowly, dreading the remainder of the evening, but knowing escape wasn't an option. Not yet. The party continued its macabre dance of manners and manipulation. Richard recovered his composure enough to blow out his birthday candles, though his wish was probably for a daughter who knew her place and a wife who asked fewer questions. The guests sang "Happy Birthday" with forced enthusiasm, while I stood at the back, my hand unconsciously protecting my stomach. As the cake was served, I noticed Davidson, the nervous CFO, slipping out to the terrace for a hushed phone conversation. His face had gone from sweaty to ashen, and he kept glancing back at Richard like a rabbit eyeing a wolf. Emma's threats hadn't been empty, and the smart rats were already looking for lifeboats. The storm that had threatened all day finally arrived as dessert was served rain, lashing against the windows with sudden violence. The lights flickered once-twice, making everyone laugh nervously. Richard raised his glass for yet another toast, the bourbon making his words slide together at the edges. To family, he declared his eyes finding the empty chairs where Emma and Maria had sat. To loyalty, and to knowing which side your bread is buttered on. We raised our glasses in a mockery of celebration while lightning split the sky outside. I sipped my water-tasting bitterness that had nothing to do with the liquid. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one building in this room, in this family, in the lies we all agreed to live. Looking back, I should have left then, should have claimed illness from the pregnancy and fled before the final act of our family tragedy. But I stayed trapped by obligation and the false hope that somehow announcing my pregnancy might salvage something from this wreckage. How wrong I was. How catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. The dinner plates had been cleared and guests mingled between the dining room and living areas while staff circulated with after-dinner drinks. The storm outside had intensified, turning the windows into sheets of water that distorted the garden lights into wavering phantoms. Richard held court near the fireplace, his voice growing louder with each bourbon, regaling anyone within earshot about his plans to expand Harrison Industries despite government interference and ungrateful children. I'd positioned myself near the terrace doors, seeking cooler air to combat the nausea that had returned with a vengeance. The combination of rich food, emotional stress, and pregnancy hormones created a perfect storm in my stomach. Jake remained across the room, deep in damage control with nervous executives who kept glancing toward the exits like spooked horses. Patricia glided through the crowd with her practiced smile, but I noticed how she flinched when Richard gestured too broadly, how she maintained careful distance from his reach. The bruises on her wrists seemed to throb in time with the lightning flashes, purple testimony to decades of careful lies. "Oh, ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice boomed over the conversations. "Before we adjourn to the conservatory for brandy, I want to thank you all for celebrating this milestone with me. 70 years of taking no prisoners and suffering no fools." Polite laughter rippled through the room, though I caught several guests checking their watches. The evening's drama had created an atmosphere thick with discomfort that no amount of expensive wine could dissolve. At that moment, elderly Mrs. Pemberton began coughing violently at the dining table. She'd been picking at the remnants of her chocolate soufflé when something went wrong. Her face turned an alarming shade of red as she clutched her throat, the universal sign of choking. Someone help her," Patricia cried out, but I was already moving. My nursing instincts kicked in, years of emergency training overriding everything else. I rushed to Mrs. Pemberton's side, quickly assessing the situation. Partial blockage, conscious but struggling. I positioned myself behind her chair, prepared to perform the Heimlich maneuver. "Lean forward," I instructed calmly, supporting her with one arm while preparing to deliver abdominal thrusts. The room had gone silent, except for Mrs. Pemberton's strangled gasps. Everyone watched as I performed the life-saving technique, quick upward thrust that finally dislodged the piece of chocolate. Mrs. Pemberton coughed violently, but began breathing normally, tears streaming down her face. I called out, and someone quickly provided a glass. As I reached across the table to get the water, everything shifted into slow motion. My sleeve, still damp from helping Mrs. Pemberton, caught the edge of a wine glass. Not just any glass, but Richard's full goblet of Chateau Margaux that he'd left at his place setting when he'd risen to make his toast. The crystal tipped with an almost musical note, burgundy liquid arcing through the air in a graceful cascade. Time stretched as I watched, horrified, as the wine splashed across Richard's chest, spreading across his pristine white dress shirt like a bloodstain. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the storm seemed to pause, holding its breath for what came next. Richard looked down at his ruined shirt, then up at me. His face transformed from shock to rage in a heartbeat, the mask of civility falling away to reveal something primitive and violent underneath. "You clumsy, worthless—" He didn't finish the sentence with words. His hand moved faster than I could process, backhanding me across the face with enough force to snap my head sideways. Pain exploded through my jaw and lip as I stumbled backward, tasting copper as blood filled my mouth. I heard my own shocked cry, felt the warm splatter as blood from my split lip sprayed across the white tablecloth. Gasps erupted from the guests' chairs, scraping as people recoiled from the violence. I pressed my hand to my mouth, blood seeping between my fingers, my ears ringing from the impact. "You stupid maid." Richard's voice reached a pitch I'd never heard before, raw and unhinged. "Look what you've done. This shirt cost more than you make in a month at your pathetic job. Get on your knees and clean it up." I stood, frozen blood dripping onto Patricia's Persian rug, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The room spun slightly, whether from the blow or shock, I couldn't tell. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard voices rising, some in protest, others in nervous confusion. But cutting through it all came Jake's voice, clear and cold. "Alesia, apologize to my father, right now." I turned to look at my husband, certain I'd misheard. But there he stood, his face a mask of disappointment. Not at his father for striking me, but at me for causing a scene. "Jake," my voice came out thick through my swelling lip, "he hit me." "You ruined his birthday and humiliated him in front of guests," Jake said, his tone measured as if explaining something to a child. "The least you can do is apologize." "Apologize?" The word tasted like blood and betrayal. For what? For saving Mrs. Pemberton's life, for accidentally spilling wine. For your constant clumsiness and inability to conduct yourself properly in society. Richard spat, dabbing at his shirt with a napkin. "I've tolerated your presence in this family for 5 years, watched you drag my son down to your level, but this ends tonight." Patricia had started crying silently, her perfect makeup running in streams. Several guests were already gathering their things, muttering excuses about the late hour and the weather. Mrs. Pemberton, still recovering from her choking incident, looked horrified at the violence that had erupted from her medical emergency. "Apologize," Jake repeated, stepping closer. "Or leave. Those are your options." I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd married, who'd promised to love and protect me, who'd stood with me before God and family, and sworn to put our union above all others. His eyes were empty of compassion, filled only with his father's reflected rage and a desperate need to restore order to their kingdom. "You want me to apologize," I said slowly, "for being assaulted by your father." "You're being dramatic," Jake said, the dismissal sharp as another slap. "It was a reaction to your clumsiness. Dad's upset he'd been drinking, and you provoked him." "Provoked him?" My voice rose despite the pain. "I was helping a choking woman and causing chaos in the process as usual." Richard interjected, his initial rage settling into cold satisfaction. "This is what comes of letting people forget their place. You've never belonged here, Alesia. Tonight just proved it." William the butler had appeared with towels and was quietly cleaning the blood from the table. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I saw something there. Not surprise, but a weary recognition. He'd cleaned up blood before. "Last chance," Jake said, his ultimatum hanging in the air like a guillotine. "Apologize to my father and we can move past this, or get out." I straightened my spine, tasting blood with every breath. Around us, the remaining guests stood frozen in a tableau of shock and social discomfort. The storm outside raged against the windows, thunder punctuating the moment of decision. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach, protecting the secret I'd carried all day, the baby I'd thought would bridge our worlds, bring joy to this fractured family. But there was no joy here, only violence and the enabling silence that allowed it to flourish. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my legs. "Don't be ridiculous," Jake started, but I was already moving. "No, Jake, I'm done being ridiculous. I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done accepting abuse disguised as tradition. I looked directly at Richard, meeting his contemptuous gaze without flinching. I'm done with all of it. If you walk out that door, Jake called after me, don't bother coming back. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the wreckage of Richard's birthday party. Patricia sobbing quietly, guests fleeing into the storm, William methodically cleaning blood from surfaces that had seen too much violence. My husband standing beside his father, their faces wearing identical expressions of entitled rage. I won't, I said, and walked out. The last thing I heard before the door closed was Richard's voice smug with victory. Good riddance to trailer trash. Should have known better than to let her type into our family. The rain hit me immediately, soaking through my dress within seconds. I stumbled to my car on shaking legs, fumbling with keys slippery from rain and blood. In the driver's seat, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lip was already swelling, blood still seeping from the split. My carefully styled hair hung in wet strings. My expensive dress, chosen to meet their impossible standards, clung to me like a shroud. But my eyes, despite the tears mixing with rain, burned with something new. Not defeat, but determination. Not shame, but righteous anger. I started the car and drove away from the Harrison estate, leaving behind 5 years of careful lies and accepted humiliations. The storm followed me through the streets of Columbus, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. My phone began buzzing before I'd even reached the main road. Jake calling, then Patricia, then numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, focusing on the road through the rain and tears and residual shock. At a red light, I finally looked at my phone. 17 missed calls already. Text messages piling up their previews showing fragments of manipulation and rage. Come back immediately. You're overreacting. Think about what you're doing. You'll regret this. I turned the phone to silent and kept driving. Let them call, let them rage. I was done answering to the Harrisons. The rain pounded against my windshield as I drove toward my new future, blood still on my lips, but freedom singing in my veins. Behind me, the Harrison estate grew smaller in the distance, its lights dim through the storm. I didn't know what came next, where I would go, or how I would rebuild, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would never apologize for someone else's violence again. The storm raged on, washing the blood from my chin and the tears from my cheeks. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like applause for a woman finally choosing herself over a family that had never chosen her. The rain hammered against my windshield as I navigated through the storm-darkened streets of Columbus, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. Blood from my split lip had dripped onto my dress, creating dark stains that spread across the silk like accusations. Every streetlight I passed illuminated my face in the rearview mirror, showing the swelling that had already begun to distort my features. I pulled into the first well-lit parking lot. I found a 24-hour pharmacy and killed the engine. My phone lit up with another barrage of calls, Jake's name flashing insistently on the screen. 32 missed calls now. The number seemed to mock me, each one representing another attempt to pull me back into their twisted world. With shaking fingers, I called the only person I trusted completely. Alesia. Denise's voice was thick with sleep. It's past 11. I need help. The words came out slurred through my swollen lip. Richard hit me. I left. I don't know where to go. The sleep vanished from her voice instantly. Where are you? Are you safe? Pharmacy parking lot on Broad Street. I'm bleeding, Denise. Stay there. Lock your doors. I'm calling the police and... No. The word erupted with more force than I intended. No police. Not yet. I just need somewhere safe to think. Okay, but we're documenting everything. Drive to Mount Carmel ER. I'll meet you there. And Alesia, don't answer Jake's calls. Not one. I drove to the hospital on autopilot muscle memory, navigating the familiar route. How many times had I made this drive for my shifts, never imagining I'd one day arrive as a patient? The emergency department's bright lights made me squint as I parked in the visitor section, my legs unsteady as I walked through the automatic doors. It's Alesia. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared immediately, her face shifting from professional concern to personal alarm. What happened to you? Sarah and I had worked together for 3 years, sharing the unique bond of night shift nurses who'd transitioned to different roles. She'd become an attending physician last year, and we'd celebrated with champagne in the break room. Now, she guided me to a private examination room with the careful touch of someone who recognized trauma. I need to document injuries from an assault. I said the clinical words easier than admitting my father-in-law had backhanded me at his birthday party. Sarah's expression darkened, but she maintained her professional composure. Let's get you cleaned up first, then we'll photograph everything and do a proper examination. She worked in efficient silence, cleaning the blood from my face with gentle precision. The split in my lip was deep, but wouldn't require stitches. The swelling along my jaw had already begun to purple, promising an impressive bruise by morning. Sarah photographed each injury from multiple angles, creating the kind of evidence that would stand up in court. The pattern suggests a backhanded strike, she murmured, examining the developing bruise. Significant force. Who did this to you? Richard Harrison. Saying his name out loud felt like breaking a spell. My father-in-law, at his birthday party, in front of 40 guests. Sarah's hands stilled on the ice pack she was preparing. Richard Harrison of Harrison Industries. That Richard Harrison. I nodded, then winced at the movement. Alesia, this isn't the first time I've treated injuries connected to that family. She met my eyes meaningfully. Your mother-in-law has been here 3 times in the past 2 years. Suspicious falls, accidental injuries, always with perfectly reasonable explanations. She showed me bruises this morning, I whispered, made me promise not to tell anyone. They always do. Sarah's voice held years of frustrated experience. But you're here now, and you're talking. That's more than most manage. Denise burst through the door, still in pajama pants beneath her raincoat, her attorney instincts already in full gear. I brought my camera for additional documentation. Sarah, I need copies of all medical records and photos. Alesia, tell me everything. I recounted the evening while Sarah finished her examination, and Denise took notes with fierce precision. Every detail felt important now, from Patricia's morning confession to Emma's confrontation about embezzlement, from the spilled wine to Jake's ultimatum. Denise's expression grew darker with each revelation. He demanded you apologize for being assaulted, she repeated, disbelief coloring her tone. Your husband watched his father strike you and demanded you apologize. He said I was being dramatic, that I'd provoked Richard by being clumsy. Classic abuse dynamics. The victim is always at fault, always the one who must make peace. Denise's pen flew across her legal pad, and 40 witnesses saw this. At least 30 were still there when it happened. Some were already leaving because of Emma's scene about the embezzlement. Embezzlement. Denise's eyebrows rose. Tell me more about that. As I explained Emma's accusations about pension fraud and offshore accounts, Denise's expression shifted from personal outrage to professional interest. If even half of that is true, Richard Harrison is looking at federal charges. No wonder he lashed out. He felt his control slipping. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the examination. Jake had moved from calls to texts, each one a masterclass in manipulation. Baby, please come home. Dad feels terrible about what happened. You're overreacting to an accident. We can work this out. Think about our marriage. Don't throw it away over one mistake. If you don't come back tonight, I'll have to take steps to protect our assets. This is your last chance to handle this privately. That last one made my blood run cold. He's threatening me. Denise read the message and smiled grimly. Let him. Every text is evidence of coercion and attempted witness intimidation. Keep your phone on silent, but don't block him. We want documentation of his spiral. Sarah returned with discharge papers and a prescription for pain medication. I've included my clinical assessment indicating injuries consistent with assault. If you decide to press charges, this documentation will be crucial. When she decides to press charges, Denise corrected, no one hits my best friend and walks away clean. As we prepared to leave, Sarah pulled me aside. There's something else. Given the trauma you've experienced, we should run some additional tests. Check your overall health, make sure the stress hasn't caused any complications. I knew what she was asking without asking. I'm 8 weeks pregnant. I haven't told anyone yet. Sarah's face softened. Then we definitely need to monitor you carefully. Severe stress can impact pregnancy. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? She's coming home with me, Denise answered. I've got a security system and a doorman who doesn't let anyone up without permission. We left through a side entrance to avoid any potential confrontation. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, the storm's fury spent. My car looked foreign in the hospital parking lot, like it belonged to someone else's life. Someone who still believed marriage could overcome fundamental character flaws. Denise drove while I sat in her passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past. My phone screen showed 53 missed calls now. Patricia had started texting her messages, a mix of apology and pleading. Alesia, dear, I'm so sorry about tonight. Please don't let this destroy your marriage. Richard didn't mean it. He's under so much stress. Come back and we can talk this through like family. Like family, as if healthy families resolve disputes with violence and demanded apologies from victims, as if love meant accepting abuse with a smile. She's been living with it for decades, I said quietly. Patricia, she's normalized it so completely she can't see how twisted it is. Stockholm Syndrome is powerful, Denise agreed, but you're not going to end up like her. We're going to make sure of that. At Denise's apartment building, the doorman took one look at my face and discreetly logged our arrival in his security book. Denise had already called ahead, instructing him that no one, especially Jake Harrison, was to be allowed up without police escort. Her apartment felt like a sanctuary, all warm lights and soft furniture, the opposite of the Harrison estate's cold perfection. She settled me on the couch with tea and ice packs while pulling out her laptop to begin building our legal strategy. First things first, she said, fingers flying over the keyboard. We file a restraining order tomorrow morning. Then we start divorce proceedings with an emergency motion for exclusive use of marital assets. Did you bring any important documents? Nothing, I just ran. The reality of my situation began to sink in. All my clothes, my documents, my mother's jewelry that I kept in our safe. We'll get it all back. For tonight, you're safe. That's what matters. My phone rang again. This time it was Emma. Answer it, Denise advised. She might have important information. Alesia, thank God. Emma's voice was tight with worry. Are you okay? William called me, said Dad hit you and you left. I'm safe, documenting injuries at the hospital. Good, document everything. Listen, Maria and I have been copying files all evening. Dad's been destroying evidence, but we saved enough to bury him. The FBI's been building a case for months. They just needed an insider to confirm what they suspected. You're going to testify. I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to make sure he pays for everything. The financial crimes, the abuse, all of it. Emma's voice hardened. Patricia finally admitted he's been hitting her for years. She's ready to leave if she has support. Of course, Denise is already working on legal strategy. There's something else. Jake's been calling our corporate lawyers trying to move money offshore. He's panicking, making mistakes. If you're planning to divorce him, you need to act fast before he hides everything. After Emma hung up, Denise and I sat in the quiet apartment processing the avalanche of revelations. My face throbbed despite the pain medication, a constant reminder of how drastically my life had changed in a single evening. You know what the hardest part is, I said, staring at my phone as Jake's calls finally stopped. I actually thought announcing my pregnancy tonight would fix things. Like a baby could somehow heal a family built on violence and lies. Well, thank God you didn't tell them, Denise said firmly. Can you imagine trying to share custody with these people, Richard having access to your child? The thought made me physically ill. My hand moved protectively to my stomach, imagining Richard's rage directed at an innocent child. Or worse, Jake teaching our son that violence was an acceptable response to frustration. The cycle continuing for another generation. "We're going to protect you and that baby," Denise promised. "Richard Harrison is about to learn what happens when you assault someone who refuses to be silenced." As midnight approached, my phone showed one final message from Jake. "You've made your choice. Don't expect mercy in the divorce. You'll get nothing." I showed it to Denise, who laughed with genuine delight. "He just threatened you in writing after you documented assault injuries. Your husband isn't just morally bankrupt Alesia, he's also spectacularly stupid." For the first time all evening, I smiled, though it pulled painfully at my split lip. Jake thought he was punishing me with his threats. He couldn't understand that losing nothing was better than keeping everything at the cost of my soul. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the city washed clean. From Denise's window, I could see the lights of downtown Columbus sparkling in the cleared air. Somewhere out there, the Harrison estate stood in darkness, its residents facing the consequences of decades of unchecked violence. And here I sat, battered but not broken, preparing for war against a family that mistook my kindness for weakness. They'd forced me to choose between their approval and my self-respect. I chose myself, and that choice would cost them everything. Denise's guest bedroom became my war room that first night. While she drafted legal documents in the living room, I sat on the bed, surrounded by my phone's glowing screen, watching the digital explosion of my former life. The missed calls had reached triple digits, but it was the text messages that told the real story of the Harrison family's unraveling. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. "Alesia, this is William. I apologize for the informal contact, but I felt you should know I've preserved tonight's security footage before Mr. Harrison could order its deletion. Should you need it for legal purposes, I have multiple copies stored safely." William, the silent observer who'd cleaned blood from Patricia's perfect tablecloth with the practice of someone who'd done it before. I saved his number immediately. "Thank you," I typed back. "Your discretion and help mean everything." "It's 40 years overdue," he replied. "The Harrisons have silenced too many voices. I'm grateful someone finally spoke loud enough to shatter their glass house." Before I could respond, my phone rang with another unknown number. This time, I let Denise answer on speaker. "Ms. Alesia Harrison." The voice was female professional with an undertone of barely contained emotion. "This is her attorney. May I ask who's calling?" "My name is Margaret Winters. I was Richard Harrison's business partner until 20 years ago. I saw social media posts about tonight's incident at the Harrison estate. I believe it's time we spoke." Denise and I exchanged glances. Emma had mentioned Margaret Winters at the party, something about Richard destroying her career. "Ms. Winters, are you offering information relevant to potential legal proceedings against Richard Harrison?" Denise's attorney voice was in full effect. "I'm offering 20 years of documented evidence of Richard Harrison's criminal behavior, assault, sexual harassment, and financial fraud. I've been waiting 2 decades for someone brave enough to stand against him publicly. Your client's courage tonight suggests she might be that person." "We can meet tomorrow," Denise began, but Margaret interrupted. "Tonight. Richard will start destroying evidence and intimidating witnesses by dawn. I have physical documents in a safety deposit box, but I can share digital copies now. Time is crucial." Within an hour, Margaret Winters sat in Denise's living room, looking like vengeance dressed in a severe black pantsuit. She was in her 60s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. The briefcase she carried looked innocuous enough, but when she opened it, she revealed the systematic documentation of Richard Harrison's crimes. I started keeping records the day he propositioned me in 1999. Margaret began, her voice steady despite the years of suppressed rage. When I refused his advances, he didn't just fire me. He destroyed my reputation, blacklisted me from every major firm in Ohio, and spread lies about embezzlement that took me years to disprove. She pulled out a digital recorder, ancient by today's standards, but still functional. What he didn't know was that I'd been recording our meetings for months, sensing something was wrong with the company finances. I have him on tape bragging about skimming from pension funds, bribing city officials, and threatening other employees who asked too many questions. "Why didn't you come forward before?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Margaret's laugh was bitter. With what proof Richard owned judges, prosecutors, police commissioners? He'd already demonstrated his ability to destroy lives. I had to wait until someone with nothing left to lose stood up to him. Tonight, that was you. She played one of the recordings. Richard's younger voice filled the room, boasting about hiding money in offshore accounts and laughing about employees too stupid to notice their retirement funds shrinking. My stomach turned at his casual cruelty. "There's more," Margaret continued. "I've kept in touch with other victims over the years. Women he assaulted, business partners, he betrayed employees, he destroyed for sport. We've been waiting, building our cases, hoping for this moment." My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Please come home. Richard is destroying things. He's drinking heavily. I'm frightened." I showed it to Denise and Margaret. "She's trying to manipulate you," Denise said immediately. "Classic abuse victim behavior, protecting the abuser." "Or she's genuinely in danger," I countered, thinking of the bruises on her wrist. Margaret pulled out her phone. "I'll handle this." She dialed quickly. "Eleanor." "It's Margaret. Yes, tonight's the night. Patricia Harrison needs an extraction. Bring the team." At my confused look, she explained, "Eleanor runs an underground network for abuse victims in high society families. They specialize in extractions where traditional law enforcement fails. Patricia will be safe within the hour, whether she wants to be or not." The surreal nature of the evening deepened. I'd stumbled into a shadow network of Richard Harrison's victims, all prepared for this moment of reckoning. My split lip had become the match that lit a fuse decades in the making. Emma called next, her voice breathless with urgency. "Maria and I are at the office copying everything. Dad's assistant just called, warning that he's planning to shred documents tomorrow. We're saving what we can, but there's so much." "William has the security footage from tonight," I told her, "and Margaret Winters is here with decades of evidence." Margaret Winters' dad's former partner. He said she died. Of course he had. Easier to kill someone in story than admit they'd survived his attempt at destruction. As the night wore on, more people emerged from the shadows. My phone rang with calls from former Harrison Industries employees, women who'd been assaulted at company parties, business owners Richard had crushed through illegal tactics. Each had kept evidence, waiting for someone to go public first. Denise documented everything with the efficiency of a prosecutor building a RICO case. "This isn't just assault anymore," she said, eyes gleaming. "This is a pattern of criminal enterprise spanning decades. Federal prosecutors will salivate over this." At 3 a.m, Jake's texts shifted from threats to desperation. "The FBI just seized our computers. They're freezing our accounts. This is your fault. Please call me. We can work this out. I'll leave him. We'll start over. Just stop this." That last message made me laugh, though it hurt my swollen face. Now he was willing to leave his father when the empire was crumbling. Where was that courage when Richard's hand was connecting with my face? Emma arrived at 4 looking haggard but triumphant. She carried boxes of printed documents and drives full of digital evidence. "I've been in touch with the FBI. They've been investigating Dad for 2 years but couldn't get anyone inside to turn. My evidence is the smoking gun they needed." "How's Patricia?" I asked. Eleanor's team extracted her around midnight. Dad was passed out drunk, never even noticed. She's at a safe house, finally ready to talk about years of abuse. Emma's voice cracked. She showed them old medical records, broken ribs, concussions, miscarriages from the stress, all hidden behind the perfect suburban wife facade. Miscarriages. The word hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my hand to my own stomach, thinking of the life growing there. Patricia had lost pregnancies because of Richard's abuse. How many potential siblings had Jake never known about? "There's something else," Emma said quietly. "About Aunt Catherine. She's not in a psychiatric facility. Dad paid her off and exiled her to Europe, but Margaret's been in touch with her. She's willing to testify about the first embezzlement scheme, the one that started everything." The sun began to rise, painting Denise's apartment in shades of pink and gold. None of us had slept, running on adrenaline and righteous fury. My face had swollen into a masterpiece of purple and blue, each throb a reminder of the moment everything changed. Denise's phone rang. She listened intently, then smiled. "That was my contact at the FBI. They're raiding the Harrison estate and offices simultaneously in 1 hour. They want you available for questioning this afternoon." "Already?" Margaret looked impressed. "Usually these things take months to coordinate." Apparently, Richard made some panicked calls to his bot judges last night. The FBI was monitoring those lines as part of their corruption investigation. He inadvertently gave them enough for immediate warrants. My phone buzzed with one final message from Jake. "They're here, FBI. This is all your fault. I'll never forgive you for destroying my family." I stared at those words, feeling their weight and rejecting their burden. I hadn't destroyed his family. I'd simply stopped enabling their destruction of others. "Response?" Denise asked, seeing my expression. "No," I said firmly. "He doesn't deserve one." As the sun climbed higher, we sat in exhausted victory. Around us lay the evidence of Richard Harrison's lifetime of crimes, each document a testament to pain endured and justice delayed. My face hurt. My heart ached for the marriage I'd thought I had, and fear for the future gnawed at my edges. But stronger than all of that was the intoxicating feeling of freedom. For 5 years, I'd made myself small to fit into their world. I'd accepted subtle cruelties and overt dismissals, told myself it was the price of loving Jake. I'd watched Patricia suffer in silence and said nothing, keeping their secrets like sacred vows. No more. Richard's backhand had broken more than my lip. It had shattered the chains of compliance that kept his victims silent. One act of violence witnessed by dozens had become the catalyst for his empire's downfall. "So what happens now?" I asked the room at large. Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her face from severe to striking. "Now, my dear, we watch the Harrison dynasty burn, and then we rebuild something better from its ashes." As if on cue, my phone lit up with news alerts. FBI raids Harrison Industries. Federal investigation into pension fraud. Prominent business leader, Richard Harrison, under investigation for assault. The world was waking up to the truth about the Harrison family, and I, with my swollen face and newfound courage, had been the one to sound the alarm. Denise squeezed my hand. "Ready for war." I thought of my unborn child, of Patricia's bruises, of all the victims waiting in the shadows for justice. I've been ready for 5 years. I just didn't know it until tonight. The sun rose fully, bathing Columbus in light that felt like promise. Somewhere across the city, FBI agents were knocking on the Harrison estate's door. Richard would answer in his monogrammed pajamas, his arrogance crumbling as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. And I sat in my friend's apartment, surrounded by evidence and allies, finally understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be silent any longer. The FBI raid on the Harrison estate made the morning news cycle with explosive force. I sat in Denise's kitchen ice pack, pressed to my swollen jaw, watching news helicopters circle the family compound like mechanical vultures. The reporters' breathless commentary provided a surreal soundtrack to my new reality. Federal agents have been on scene for over 2 hours, removing boxes of what appear to be financial documents. We've received unconfirmed reports that Richard Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries, has been taken into custody, though FBI spokesperson declined to comment. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Journalists had somehow gotten my number, leaving voicemails that ranged from sympathetic to salacious. Denise fielded them all, crafting a simple statement. My client is cooperating fully with federal authorities and has no comment at this time. By 9 o'clock, we sat in the conference room of Denise's law firm, joined by 2 additional attorneys she'd called in for support. Marcus Chen specialized in high-asset divorces, while Sandra Williams had made her reputation destroying abusers in court. Well, first things first, Marcus said, sliding documents across the table. We file for emergency protective orders and freeze marital assets before Jake can hide anything else. I've already had forensic accountants tracking overnight transfers. He moved $2 million to accounts in the Caymans around 3 this morning. Too late, Sandra added with satisfaction. Federal asset forfeiture laws mean anything connected to Richard's crimes becomes evidence. Jake just implicated himself in money laundering. Denise pulled up security footage on her laptop. William sent the complete video from last night, multiple angles, HD quality audio included. Richard's assault on Alesia is captured in devastating clarity. We watched in silence. Even knowing what was coming, seeing Richard's hand connect with my face made me flinch. The sound of impact echoed through the conference room speakers, followed by the gasps of party guests and the splatter of blood on white linen. This is a prosecutor's dream, Sandra murmured. 40 witnesses, video evidence, medical documentation. Richard Harrison won't see daylight for years. What about Jake? I asked. He didn't hit me, but... He threatened you, attempted to coerce you into silence, and is now actively involved in hiding assets. That's witness intimidation and financial crimes. Marcus pulled up bank records on his tablet. Plus, Emma Harrison's evidence shows he's been complicit in the pension fraud for at least 3 years. Your husband is looking at federal charges regardless of the divorce. The reality of it settled over me like a weight. I'd married a criminal, shared a bed with someone who'd stolen from elderly employees' retirement funds. The man who'd charmed me with coffee shop conversation had been embezzling while I saved premature babies. I need a moment, I said, stepping onto the firm's balcony. Columbus stretched before me, normal people living normal lives. Somewhere in this city, Harrison Industries employees were discovering their pensions were gone. Somewhere, Patricia sat in a safe house nursing decades of hidden bruises. Somewhere, Jake was learning that his father's protection couldn't save him from federal prosecution. Denise joined me, offering silent support. It's a lot to process. I'm pregnant, I said quietly. 8 weeks. I haven't told anyone except the hospital staff. She absorbed this without judgment. That complicates things, but it also strengthens our position. No judge will grant an abuser access to a child, especially with federal charges pending. I keep thinking about Patricia's miscarriages. What if the stress... Stop. Denise's voice was firm. You're not Patricia. You got out after the first hit, not the 1,000th. You're surrounded by support, not isolation. This baby will be born into freedom, not fear. We returned to find the conference room in controlled chaos. Sandra was on the phone with the prosecutor's office while Marcus typed furiously on his laptop. A paralegal rushed in with printed documents, her face flushed with excitement. What's happening? I asked. Marcus looked up, grinning. Jake just made our job easier. He tried to access your joint accounts to pay for Richard's defense attorney. The FBI flagged it as attempted witness tampering since you're listed as a federal witness now. They've arrested him. The news should have brought satisfaction, but I felt only emptiness. 5 years of marriage reduced to criminal charges and frozen assets. The man who'd promised to love and protect me was in handcuffs because he'd chosen his father over basic human decency. My phone rang. Emma. "Are you watching the news?" she asked breathlessly. "They've arrested Dad and Jake. Mom's agreed to testify. The FBI says, and with her testimony and our evidence, both of them are looking at 20 to 30 years. How's Patricia handling it?" "Better than expected. Eleanor's team includes therapists who specialize in domestic violence recovery. Mom's already talking about things she's kept silent about for decades. Did you know Dad killed her dog when she first tried to leave him 20 years ago? Made it look like an accident. But she knew." My stomach churned. The depths of Richard's cruelty seemed bottomless. "There's more," Emma continued. "Aunt Catherine is flying in from Switzerland. She's been documenting Richard's crimes from afar for 20 years, waiting for this moment. And Alesia. There are others, so many others. Margaret Winters has been building a coalition of Richard's victims. The FBI says it's one of the largest white-collar crime cases they've seen." After she hung up, we spent hours building our legal strategy. The divorce would be straightforward given Jake's arrest, but protecting my assets and ensuring my safety required careful planning. Sandra crafted restraining orders that would prevent any Harrison family member from contacting me. Marcus traced every penny of marital property, distinguishing my pre-marriage assets from anything tainted by criminal enterprise. "Your nursing license and earning potential are protected," he assured me. "The apartment will be sold, but your personal property will be returned. We're asking for full custody with no visitation rights given the federal charges and history of violence." "What about Patricia?" I asked. "She's still technically family?" "Patricia Harrison is a victim, not a threat," Sandra said. "We can build in exceptions for her if you want to maintain contact." I thought about Patricia's shaking hands, her purple bruises, her desperate attempts to keep peace in a war zone. Yes, she shouldn't lose everyone because she finally found courage. Around noon, my phone rang with another unknown number. This time, I answered myself. "You stupid girl!" The voice was slurred but unmistakably Richard's. "You've destroyed everything. 40 years of building an empire gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." "Richard, you're calling from federal custody. This is being recorded," I said calmly, putting him on speaker for the attorneys to hear. "I don't care," he roared. "You think you've won. I've bought judges for longer than you've been alive. This will all go away, and when it does, I'll make sure you pay for every moment of inconvenience." "Mr. Harrison," Sandra spoke up, "you've just threatened a federal witness on a recorded line. Thank you for making our job easier." The line went dead. Marcus was already typing. "That's another felony charge. Threatening a federal witness from custody. His lawyer must be having a heart attack." The afternoon brought a parade of revelations. The forensic accountants found 17 offshore accounts totaling $43 million. The FBI discovered 2 sets of books for Harrison Industries, one real and one sanitized for regulators. Employee pension funds had been drained systematically for 15 years, the money funding Richard's lavish lifestyle while retired workers struggled to pay for medication. Jake's attempts to hide assets had been amateur at best. In his panic, he'd left digital footprints everywhere, transferring money through easily traceable channels. The prosecutors seemed almost gleeful at his incompetence. "Your husband thought he was smart," Marcus observed, "but he'd never had to be. Daddy always cleaned up his messes. Without Richard's protection, Jake's just another entitled criminal making stupid mistakes." By evening, exhaustion weighed on me like lead. My face had swollen into a spectacular rainbow of bruises, and the pregnancy nausea had returned with vengeance. But we'd accomplished more in one day than I'd thought possible. "You need rest," Denise said firmly. "Tomorrow will be intense. The FBI wants your formal statement, and the media attention will only grow." As we prepared to leave, Sandra pulled me aside. "You should know that what you did last night was extraordinary. Most victims of domestic violence take years to leave if they ever do. You walked out immediately, sought help, and started the avalanche that's bringing down a criminal empire. That takes incredible strength." I had advantages. I said, thinking of my education, my career, My friendship with Denise. Not everyone has options. No, Sandra agreed, which is why what you're doing matters. Your visibility, your willingness to stand up publicly will help others find their courage. Back at Denise's apartment, I finally checked my personal email. Between the media requests and messages of support, one stood out. Dear Alesia, it read, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I was Richard Harrison's secretary from 1998 to 2003. He assaulted me repeatedly, then fired me when I became pregnant. He told everyone I'd stolen from the company, ruining my reputation. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to him. Thank you for being that person. If you need my testimony, I'm ready. I read message after message from Richard's victims. Women he'd assaulted, businesses he'd destroyed, employees he'd cheated. Each had kept silent out of fear or futility, watching him prosper while they suffered. My split lip had given them permission to speak their truth. As night fell, I sat by Denise's window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere Jake sat in a federal holding cell, probably still believing his father would save him. Somewhere Richard raged against the consequences of his actions, unable to accept that money couldn't buy his way out this time. And here I sat, battered but not broken, carrying a child who would never know the suffocating weight of the Harrison legacy. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but perhaps it was the life I needed. My phone buzzed with a final message of the day. Patricia, from her safe house. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. Thank you for protecting yourself, for protecting all of us. Tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I slept without fear. I touched my swollen face, feeling the pain that had started this avalanche of truth. Sometimes the hardest blow we take becomes the one that sets us free. Tomorrow would bring FBI interviews and media scrutiny, divorce papers, and criminal trials. But tonight I sat in safety, surrounded by legal strategies and evidence of justice approaching on federal wings. The Harrisons had built their empire on silence and fear. With one refusal to apologize, I'd brought it all crashing down. The morning news hit Columbus like an earthquake, sending shockwaves through every social circle the Harrisons had ever touched. I awoke to Denise's television, blaring headlines that seemed ripped from a crime thriller. Harrison Industries executives arrested in massive fraud scheme. Domestic violence at elite birthday party triggers federal investigation. Victims come forward against prominent business dynasty. My face had evolved into an artist's palette of purple, blue, and sickly yellow. The swelling made me almost unrecognizable, which proved useful when Denise and I slipped out the building's back entrance to avoid the photographers already gathering at the front. Emma's holding a press conference at 10. Denise informed me as we drove to her law firm. She's going fully public with the financial evidence. My sister-in-law had transformed overnight from the family rebel to its avenging angel. When we tuned into the live stream from Denise's office, Emma stood behind a podium flanked by Maria and 3 attorneys, her chin raised in defiance of everything her father had tried to beat into her. For 25 years, I watched my father, Richard Harrison, rule through fear and greed. Emma began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her betrayal. I stayed silent out of misguided loyalty and self-preservation. That silence ends today. She laid out the evidence with devastating precision. Spreadsheets showing pension funds diverted to offshore accounts. Emails between Richard and Jake discussing how to hide the theft from auditors. A systematic pattern of fraud that had stolen $37 million from employees who'd worked their entire careers believing in the company's integrity. My brother Jake Harrison wasn't just complicit. Emma continued, her voice hardening. He actively expanded the scheme, targeting newer employees who wouldn't notice discrepancies for years. While his wife saved lives as a nurse, he was destroying the futures of hundreds of families. The questions from reporters came fast and brutal. Emma fielded them with grace, never flinching from the hard truths. When asked about the assault at Richard's party, she looked directly into the camera. "I watched my father strike my sister-in-law Alesia for accidentally spilling wine. I watched my brother demand she apologize for being assaulted. That was just the visible violence. What happened behind closed doors was far worse, and my mother, Patricia Harrison, is prepared to testify to decades of abuse." The press conference sent Harrison Industries stock into freefall. By noon, trading had been suspended, and corporate partners were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. The empire Richard had spent 40 years building crumbled in hours. My phone rang constantly. Journalists, distant acquaintances suddenly concerned about my well-being, and numbers I didn't recognize but suspected were Jake's fellow inmates borrowing phone time. I ignored them all, focusing on the FBI interview scheduled for that afternoon. The federal building downtown swarmed with media, but we entered through a secure underground entrance. Agent Sarah Coleman, a woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, led us to a conference room where the scope of the investigation became clear. "Mrs. Harrison, what you triggered 2 nights ago has given us the break we've needed for years." She began spreading files across the table. "Your willingness to report the assault publicly emboldened 43 additional victims to come forward in the last 36 hours. 43. The number staggered me. "Richard Harrison has been a predator for decades," Agent Coleman continued. "Financial crimes were just part of it. We have credible allegations of sexual assault, blackmail, and at least 2 suspicious deaths of former employees who threatened to expose him." Deaths. My voice came out strangled. Both ruled suicides at the time, but the patterns are suspicious. One victim was about to file a lawsuit for sexual harassment. The other had discovered the pension fraud scheme. Both died within days of confronting Richard. The room spun slightly. I'd married into a family capable of murder. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach, protecting the innocent life that shared DNA with monsters. The interview lasted 4 hours. I recounted every detail of the birthday party, the years of subtle abuse that preceded it, Jake's transformation from loving husband to his father's mirror. Agent Coleman recorded everything, her expression growing grimmer with each revelation. "Your medical records from the hospital have been entered into evidence," she said. "Dr. Chen's documentation is exemplary. Combined with the security footage and witness statements, Richard faces minimum 10 years for assault alone. The financial crimes could add another 20. "What about Jake? "Your husband is trying to make a deal. He's offering full cooperation against his father in exchange for reduced charges." She paused, studying my reaction. "He's claiming Richard forced him into the financial crimes through threats and manipulation." The Jake I'd married might have been manipulated. The Jake who demanded I apologize for being assaulted was a willing participant in his father's evil. "He made his choices," I said simply. As we prepared to leave, Agent Coleman handed me a card. "You're under federal protection now. Any threats, any contact from the Harrison family or their associates, call immediately. We take witness safety seriously." Outside, Denise's phone buzzed with urgent messages. "Patricia's given her first formal statement," she said, reading quickly. "Richard broke her arm twice, caused 3 miscarriages through violence, and threatened to kill Emma when she came out. She has medical records going back 25 years. 25 years of documented abuse hidden behind designer clothes and charity galas. Patricia's perfect smile at country club brunches had been masking fractures that ran bone deep. That evening, the news covered the story from every angle. Financial analysts discussed the collapse of Harrison Industries. Legal experts debated potential sentences. But it was the human interest segments that hit hardest as Richard's victims found their voices. Jennifer Walsh, his former secretary, appeared on national television describing years of assault and the career destruction that followed her pregnancy. A construction company owner revealed how Richard had used forged documents to steal his contracts, driving him to bankruptcy. Employee after employee shared stories of bounced retirement checks and empty promises. Emma called as I watched the coverage from Denise's couch. "I'm at Mom's safe house. She wants to see you." "Is that wise, the restraining orders?" "She's not a threat, Alesia. She's broken. All these years of enabling him, of teaching us to accept the unacceptable. She's drowning in guilt." An hour later, I sat across from Patricia in a nondescript apartment that served as a temporary shelter. The elegant woman who'd presided over countless social events looked diminished, her designer clothes replaced with simple cotton, her perfect makeup washed away to reveal the exhaustion beneath. "I failed you," she said without preamble. "When you married Jake, I knew what family you were entering. I should have warned you, should have protected you. Instead, I taught you to make yourself smaller, to accept cruelty as the price of belonging." "You were surviving," I said, surprising myself with the lack of anger. "You were taught the same lessons." Patricia's tears came, then decades of suppressed emotion flooding out. I lost 3 babies to his violence. 3, and I stayed. I made excuses. I protected him even as he destroyed everything good in our lives. "But you're here now. You're testifying. That matters." She looked at me with wonder. "One blow. He hit you once and you brought down his entire world. I took thousands of blows and only learned to hide them better." "You didn't have Emma then, or Margaret Winters building a coalition, or federal investigators already circling. I had advantages you didn't." We talked for 2 hours, 2 women bound by the same man's violence, but separated by generations of evolved understanding about abuse. Patricia revealed details that would strengthen the prosecution's case: hidden cameras Richard used to spy on employees' bribes to judges whose names she'd memorized, a safety deposit box containing evidence of his earliest crimes. "There's something else," she said as I prepared to leave, "about Jake. He wasn't always like Richard. As a boy, he was gentle, protective of Emma. The change started in high school when Richard began grooming him. I watched my sweet son transform into his father's creature, and I did nothing to stop it." "Could you have stopped it?" Patricia's smile held infinite sadness. "I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." The drive back to Denise's gave me time to process the day's revelations. The Harrison family hadn't just fractured, it had exploded, sending shrapnel in every direction. Each piece of debris revealed another crime, another victim, another life destroyed by Richard's insatiable hunger for power. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Jake. Against my better judgment, I listened to the first voicemail. "Alesia, please. I know you hate me, but I need you to understand. He made me do it. All of it. The fraud, the threats, everything. I wanted to protect you, but he said he'd hurt you if I didn't cooperate. Please, just let me explain. I love you. I've always loved you. Don't let them destroy us." The Jake I'd married could reduce me to tears with his sincerity. This Jake facing federal charges and desperate for any lifeline only made me feel hollow. Love without action was just manipulation dressed in prettier clothes. I deleted the message and blocked his number. That night, Denise and I watched the late news coverage. Harrison Industries had officially filed for bankruptcy. The board had voted unanimously to cooperate with federal investigators, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. Richard's country club had revoked his membership. The charity boards Patricia had graced for decades were distancing themselves with carefully worded statements. "Oh, from dynasty to disgrace in 48 hours, Denise observed. Has to be some kind of record." But the real victory came in the flood of messages from abuse survivors who'd found courage in my story. Women trapped in golden cages with violent men. Employees afraid to report financial crimes. Victims who'd spent years believing their silence was the only option. "You gave them permission to speak," Denise said, reading the messages with me. "That's the real legacy of this nightmare." As midnight approached, exhaustion finally overtook adrenaline. My face throbbed, the baby made me nauseous, and the emotional weight of destroying my married life pressed down like lead. But underneath it all, a different feeling grew. Not satisfaction. There was too much pain for that. Not happiness, too many victims for celebration, but something cleaner and stronger, the bone-deep relief of truth told after years of suffocating lies. The Harrison Empire had fallen because one woman refused to apologize for someone else's violence. The dynasty built on silence had crumbled at the first honest scream. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more victims finding their voices, more consequences for decades of unchecked abuse. The trials would be lengthy, the healing longer still. But tonight, Patricia slept in safety for the first time in 30 years. Emma stood proud with Maria instead of hiding in California. 43 victims had stepped from shadows into light. And I sat with my best friend, my face a rainbow of healing bruises, carrying a baby who would never know the weight of the Harrison name as anything but a cautionary tale. The empire had fallen. In its ruins, something better could finally grow. Monday morning arrived with the harsh reality of financial devastation. I sat in a sterile conference room at Denise's law firm, surrounded by forensic accountants who painted a picture of corporate crime that would make headlines for years. The lead accountant, David Park, had spent the weekend analyzing Harrison Industries' records with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. "It's worse than we initially thought," he said, pulling up spreadsheets that looked like criminal masterpieces. "The pension fund theft was just the tip. They've been running multiple fraudulent schemes simultaneously for 15 years. The numbers blurred together, ghost employees siphoning salaries, construction projects that existed only on paper, government contracts obtained through bribes that Richard had meticulously documented, apparently believing his own power made him untouchable. Your husband," David continued, and I flinched at the term, accelerated the fraud when he became CFO 3 years ago. He created an algorithm that automatically skimmed from every transaction, hiding the theft in decimal points across thousands of daily operations. Jake created that. I thought of my husband struggling to calculate restaurant tips, claiming math wasn't his strong suit. The code has his digital signature. He was apparently more talented than anyone realized, just chose to use it for crime. David pulled up another screen. He also established shell companies in 12 countries, layering the money through so many transactions it took our best analysts days to unravel. The Jake I'd married couldn't have done this. But then again, the Jake I'd married wouldn't have demanded I apologize for being assaulted. People I was learning contained multitudes of deception. My phone buzzed. "Emma, turn on Channel 6. Now." The conference room television showed a breaking news alert. Harrison Industries building seized by federal agents. We watched live footage of employees streaming out of the downtown high-rise, carrying boxes of personal belongings, their faces mixing shock with relief. "Most of them just learned their pensions are gone," Sandra said quietly. 20-30 years of retirement savings vanished into Richard's offshore accounts. The news cut to interviews with employees. A 60-year-old janitor who'd worked nights for 25 years planning to retire next month now faced poverty. A single mother from accounting discovered her daughter's college fund, managed by the company, had been emptied. Story after story of ordinary people destroyed by extraordinary greed. "We need to establish a victims fund," I said suddenly. "Use whatever assets can be recovered to help these employees first." Marcus nodded approvingly. "We can propose that in the divorce settlement. Any marital assets not tainted by crime could be directed to employee restitution." "Everything's tainted." I said the truth, bitter but necessary. "The house, the cars, the jewelry Jake bought me, it all came from stolen money. I don't want any of it." The meeting continued with discussions of asset forfeiture, divorce proceedings, and criminal trials. But I kept thinking about that janitor working nights to build a future that Richard had stolen for yacht upgrades. Agent Coleman called with an update. Richard's trying to claim diminished capacity, says the stress of retirement triggered a breakdown. His lawyers are grasping at straws. Well, what about Jake? Still trying to flip on everyone. He's given us names of judges. Richard bribed politicians who took payoffs, even other business leaders involved in the network. He's desperate to avoid maximum sentences. Is it helping him? Some, but assault and witness intimidation charges stand regardless. He's looking at minimum 5 years, possibly 10. 5 to 10 years. My marriage reduced to a federal sentence. The man who'd promised to love and honor me would spend our anniversary years in prison orange. That afternoon brought another blow. William the butler who'd saved the security footage revealed more evidence he'd been collecting. He arrived at the law firm carrying banker's boxes like a man delivering holy relics. 20 years of documentation. He said his dignity intact, despite the magnitude of his betrayal of the family he'd served. I started keeping records after Richard forced my cousin Catherine into exile. She was my reason for taking the job to protect Patricia and gather evidence. Catherine Harrison, the ghost aunt whose name caused Patricia to flinch. William revealed her story in clinical detail, a brilliant woman who discovered Richard's first embezzlement scheme in 1995. When she threatened exposure, Richard had her committed to a psychiatric facility, claiming she'd had a breakdown. 6 months of forced medication and isolation. Later, she agreed to exile in exchange for her freedom. She lives in Switzerland now, William explained. Changed her name, built a new life, but she never forgot. We've been corresponding for years, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Sandra asked. William's expression hardened. With what proof Richard owned judges, doctors, police commissioners? Catherine tried the legal route. It destroyed her. We needed someone with public sympathy and unimpeachable evidence. Mrs. Harrison's assault captured on video, with 40 witnesses provided both. The butler had been playing a long game, gathering evidence while appearing loyal. Every cruel word, every violent act, every financial crime had been documented by the man who served their drinks and cleaned their blood from expensive surfaces. There's video evidence of other assaults, he continued. Richard was arrogant enough to keep security cameras throughout the house. I have footage of him striking Patricia multiple times, throwing objects at staff, even attacking a business partner who questioned the books. How much footage? 60 hours, all copied before he could destroy it. 60 hours of documented abuse. The Harrison home had been a crime scene masquerading as luxury real estate. The news broke about the video evidence just as markets closed. Harrison. Industry stock already worthless was delisted entirely. Business partners fled like passengers from a sinking ship. By evening, 3 more companies Richard had partnerships with announced internal audits, trying to distance themselves from contamination. Emma organized an emergency press conference for Harrison Industries employees. She stood before hundreds of workers whose futures had been stolen, her voice steady, despite visible exhaustion. I cannot undo my father's crimes or my brother's complicity, she said. But I can promise complete transparency in recovering what was stolen. Every hidden account we find, every asset we recover will go to employee restitution. You built this company with your labor and loyalty. You deserve every penny we can claw back from those who betrayed you. The employees' response mixed anger with admiration. Emma was a Harrison tainted by the name, but she was also the one exposing the truth, regardless of personal cost. When she announced she'd liquidate her own trust fund for the victims' relief, several workers openly wept. My inheritance came from your stolen futures, Emma explained. I won't build my life on that foundation. I watched from Denise's apartment, feeling strange pride in my sister-in-law. She could have stayed silent, protected herself, maintained access to wealth. Instead, she'd chosen justice over comfort, truth over family loyalty. My phone rang, an unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. "You've destroyed everything." Richard's words slurred with rage and what sounded like smuggled alcohol. "My company, my family, my legacy, all because you couldn't take a little discipline." "Richard, this call is being—" Shut up," he screamed. "You worthless nobody. You think you've won? I've got friends, real friends, not like the rats abandoning ship now. When I get out, and I will get out, I'm gonna make you pay. You and that bastard you're carrying." My blood froze. "What did you say? You think I didn't know Patricia can't keep secrets? Pregnant with my grandchild, and you didn't even have the decency to tell us? Well, enjoy raising it alone, because when I'm done with Jake, he won't have a pot to piss in, let alone child support." The line went dead. I sat shaking, processing the implications. Richard knew about the pregnancy. Had Patricia told him, or had he found out another way? And what did he mean about making me pay? "He threatened the baby," I told Denise, playing the recording. "That's a new charge, threatening an unborn child." "It's more than that," Sandra said after listening to the message. "He revealed knowledge of your pregnancy that wasn't public. If Patricia told him while in the safe house, that's a security breach. If he found out through other means, he might have people on the outside helping him." The thought chilled me. Richard in prison was dangerous enough. Richard with loyal associates still free was terrifying. Security increased immediately. The FBI assigned protective details and Denise hired private bodyguards. What had started as domestic violence had evolved into something requiring federal protection. That evening brought unexpected visitors. 3 women who'd worked at Harrison Industries years ago, each with stories of Richard's abuse and Jake's enabling. They'd been silent out of fear and NDAs, but criminal prosecutions voided those agreements. "Jake wasn't violent like his father," one explained, "but he was complicit. He'd schedule meetings he knew would trigger Richard's rage, then send female employees in alone. He'd watch through the glass doors, documenting who broke down, who fought back, who could be manipulated." My husband had been screening victims for his father, testing women like lab rats to see who would endure abuse silently. The gentle man who'd courted me with coffee and kindness had been auditioning me for a role I hadn't known existed. I passed the test. I said, understanding flooding through me. I was quiet, accommodating, eager to please. Perfect victim material. "Until you weren't," Denise pointed out. "One blow and you walked out. They underestimated you." Maybe. Or maybe pregnancy had given me strength I hadn't possessed before. Not just for myself, but for the innocent life depending on my choices. The news coverage that night focused on the human cost. Financial analysts calculated that Harrison Industries fraud had stolen approximately $300 million over 15 years. But numbers couldn't capture the janitor who'd lost his retirement or the single mother facing poverty. Emma announced she was establishing a non-profit to help white-collar crime victims navigate recovery. Mariah would run it using her forensic accounting skills to help families untangle fraudulent finances. Patricia had agreed to serve on the board, her first public role independent of Richard. From perpetrators to advocates, the news anchor observed, the Harrison women are rewriting their family legacy. As I prepared for bed in Denise's guest room, my phone showed one final message. From Jake this time, somehow sent from federal custody. "I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But please know that I loved you in my broken way. The baby you're carrying is the only good thing to come from our marriage. Please don't let them grow up hating their father. I'm going to get help, real help. Maybe someday I can be the man you thought you married. I'm sorry, Alesia, for all of it." I stared at the message for a long time. Was this manipulation or genuine remorse? Could someone raised by Richard Harrison learn to be different, or was the poison too deep in his veins? I deleted the message without responding. Jake's redemption, if it came, would have to happen without me. I had a child to protect and a life to rebuild. Outside federal agents maintained their vigil around Denise's building. The Harrison Empire had collapsed, but its aftershocks would ripple for months. Trials to endure, testimony to give, a divorce to finalize. But for tonight, I was safe. Patricia was free. Emma had found her courage, and hundreds of employees had hope for recovering their stolen futures. The Harrison dynasty had ruled through fear for 40 years. It had taken only 48 hours of truth to bring it down. In my womb, the next generation grew innocent of their heritage of violence and greed. I pressed my hand to my stomach, making a silent promise. This child would know love without conditions, success without cruelty, family without fear. The empire had fallen. From its ashes we would build something worthy of the innocence I carried. The federal courthouse in downtown Columbus had become my second home by the third week after Richard's birthday party. I sat in a witness preparation room, my bruises faded to yellow-green shadows that makeup could finally cover. Across from me, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Rodriguez organized files with the precision of someone preparing for war. "The grand jury convenes tomorrow," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd taken down bigger monsters than Richard Harrison. "With your testimony and the evidence we've compiled, the indictments are guaranteed, but I need you prepared for what's coming." She spread photographs across the table, crime scene photos, but not from murders. These showed Patricia's documented injuries over the years, employee records with desperate notes about missing pension funds, screenshots of Jake's algorithm, stealing pennies that became millions. "Richard's lawyers will try to destroy you on the stand," Michelle continued. "They'll claim you're a bitter daughter-in-law seeking revenge, that you exaggerated the assault, that you're after money." "I don't want money," I said for the 100th time. "I want justice." "I know that, but they'll twist everything. Your pregnancy will be portrayed as calculated timing, your friendship with Denise as a premeditated setup. They'll dig into your past, your family, anything to discredit you." I thought of my parents in their modest Columbus home, probably fielding reporter calls about their daughter who'd brought down a dynasty. They'd been nothing but supportive, my mother, even offering to move in to help with the baby. The Harrisons would try to paint them as gold diggers who'd raised one. "Let them dig," I said. "They'll find a middle-class family who taught me right from wrong. That's what Richard never understood. Money can't buy character." Michelle smiled, the expression sharp as a blade. "That's why you're our star witness. You walked away from millions rather than apologize for being abused. Juries love integrity, and you bleed it." The door opened and Agent Coleman entered with Emma and Patricia. My mother-in-law looked stronger than she had 2 weeks ago, though her hands still trembled when stressed. Emma had cut her hair shorter, a visible declaration of independence from Harrison expectations. "We've just come from Jake's debriefing," Coleman announced. "He's given us everything. Names, dates, amounts, methods. Your husband is singing like a canary trying to save his own tail feathers." "Was ex-husband," I corrected. "The divorce papers had been filed, though. Finalizing them would take months." "He revealed something interesting," Coleman continued. "Richard has been planning contingencies for years. Hidden assets even Jake didn't know about. Safe deposit boxes under false names, properties purchased through shell companies so complex, our analysts are still untangling them." Patricia straightened. "The hunting cabin." Everyone turned to her. "Richard bought a hunting cabin in West Virginia 15 years ago. He said it was for business retreats, but he never took anyone there. He'd disappear for weekends, always alone. I think that's where he kept things he didn't want anyone to find." Coleman was already on her phone barking orders about search warrants and field teams. Within minutes, she confirmed FBI agents were en route to West Virginia. "If there's evidence there, we'll find it," she assured us. Michelle returned to trial preparation, walking us through the process. "Tomorrow, you'll tell the grand jury your story. Every detail, every emotion. Don't hold back. These are crimes that devastated hundreds of lives. The jury needs to feel that weight. What about Jake's testimony? Emma asked. Will he testify against Dad? He's willing to testify about the financial crimes, Michelle said carefully, but he refuses to address the domestic violence. Claims he never saw Richard hit Patricia, never witnessed prior assaults. Liar, Patricia whispered. He saw. He all saw. We just learned to look away. The preparation continued for hours. Michelle ran us through potential questions, teaching us to answer clearly without elaborating unnecessarily. She showed us diagrams of the courtroom, explained where Richard would sit, how to maintain composure when facing him. He'll try to intimidate you with looks, gestures, maybe even mouthed threats, she warned. Don't react. Every time he shows his true nature, the jury sees the monster beneath the suit. That evening, I returned to Denise's apartment to find a package waiting. No return address, but the contents made my blood run cold. Photos of me from the past week entering the courthouse at the doctor's office, even through Denise's apartment window. Each photo had a red X drawn across my face. "Ago security breach," Denise said immediately, calling the FBI. Within an hour, the apartment swarmed with agents. The photos were professional quality, taken with telephoto lenses from significant distances. Whoever was stalking me had resources and skill. Richard still has loyalists, Coleman explained. Business associates who benefited from his crimes, judges and cops still on his payroll despite the investigation. Someone's trying to scare you before testimony. Is it working? She asked, studying my face. I thought of the janitor who'd lost his retirement, Patricia's broken bones, my unborn child who deserved a world without fear. No, it's making me angrier. Security protocols increased again. I couldn't leave the apartment without guards, couldn't communicate with anyone outside the approved list. The simple act of buying groceries became a military operation. Jake called that night from Federal Holding. I almost didn't accept, but curiosity won. Alesia, thank God! He sounded exhausted, broken. I heard about the photos. I swear it's not me. I'm cooperating fully. I want to help. Help you want to help now. I know how Dad thinks. The cabin in West Virginia, there's a hidden room. Behind the gun safe. That's where he keeps his insurance policies dirt on everyone who ever crossed him. If the FBI finds that. Why are you telling me this? A long pause. Because I spent 5 years watching him destroy you in small ways and I did nothing. Because our child deserves a father who finally chose right, even if too late. Because I loved you once before I let him poison everything. You're trying to manipulate me. No, his voice cracked. I'm trying to warn you. Dad's not just violent, he's vindictive. He documented everything, everyone's secrets. If that room is opened, a lot of powerful people will be exposed. They'll do anything to prevent that. The call ended, with Jake's time running out. I relayed the information to Coleman, who seemed unsurprised. We suspected something like that. Richard Harrison didn't survive 40 years in business without leverage. The question is, who's desperate enough to threaten a federal witness? The answer came at 3 a.m. Denise's apartment building's fire alarm shrieked, sending us stumbling into the hallway. But there was no fire, just smoke bombs in the stairwells and a message spray-painted on my apartment door, "Testify and burn." We evacuated to a federal safe house, a nondescript apartment in a building full of protected witnesses. My new reality, living in hiding because I'd refused to apologize for being hit. The grand jury convened the next morning in a heavily guarded courthouse. I sat outside the jury room, hands folded over my growing belly, as Patricia testified first. She emerged 3 hours later, tears streaming but head high. I told them everything, she whispered. 30 years of violence, names, dates, hospital visits. I even told them about the babies I lost. Emma went next, armed with boxes of financial evidence. Her testimony took 4 hours, methodically laying out the empire of fraud Richard and Jake had built on employee suffering. Then my turn came. The grand jury room felt smaller than expected, 23 citizens staring at me with mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Michelle had coached me well. Start with the birthday party, she'd said. Make them see it, feel it. Understand how one moment of violence revealed decades of hidden abuse. I spoke for 2 hours, my voice steady even when describing the blood spattering Patricia's white tablecloth. The jury leaned forward when I explained Jake's ultimatum, several women shaking their heads in disgust. When I revealed the pregnancy, explaining how I'd hoped it would bridge our divided worlds, one juror wiped away tears. Richard Harrison built his empire on silence, I concluded. Every victim who stayed quiet, every employee too frightened to report theft, every family member who learned to look away from bruises. I refused to be silent. That's why I'm here carrying his grandchild but testifying to his crimes. Silence is complicity. I choose truth. The questions came gently but thoroughly. Why hadn't I reported earlier incidents? Had I known about the financial crimes? What did I want from this process? I want the employees to get their money back, I answered. I want Patricia to live without fear. I want my child to grow up in a world where power doesn't excuse violence. But mostly, I want Richard Harrison to face consequences for the first time in his 70 years. When I emerged, Michelle waited with a rare smile. You were perfect. The foreman was crying by the end. If they don't indict on every count, I'll eat my briefcase. The celebration was short-lived. Coleman rushed up with urgent news. The West Virginia cabin was booby-trapped. 2 agents injured when they tried to enter the hidden room. Whoever's protecting Richard's secrets is playing for keeps. But did they get in? Eventually, and Jake was right. It's a blackmail museum. Photos, recordings, documents on half the powerful people in Ohio, judges, politicians, business leaders, even federal agents. Richard kept leverage on everyone. The implications staggered me. Richard hadn't just been a criminal. He'd been a puppet master controlling vast networks through fear and secrets. No wonder someone was desperate to silence me. My testimony threatened not just Richard, but an entire web of corruption. We're moving you again, Coleman decided. Full witness protection until the trials conclude. For how long? Months, maybe a year. However long it takes to unravel this network and neutralize threats. A year in hiding. A year of assumed names and strange apartments of looking over my shoulder and jumping at shadows. All because I'd refused to apologize for someone else's violence. That night, in yet another safe house, I video called my parents. They looked older, worn by worry and media harassment, but their pride shone through the pixelated connection. You did the right thing, my mother said firmly. That family tried to break you, make you small and controllable. Instead, you stood tall. We're so proud. My father nodded. Let them come after us. We've got nothing to hide and everything to be proud of. Our daughter brought down a monster. Emma texted updates from the outside world. The grand jury had returned indictments on 67 counts. Richard faced 300 years if convicted on all charges. Jake was looking at 50. Lesser players in the network were already making deals, trading information for leniency. The empire isn't just falling, Emma wrote. It's being demolished brick by brick. Your testimony started an avalanche. I sat in my anonymous bedroom, hand on my growing belly, thinking about avalanches. How a single snowflake could trigger destruction if conditions were right. How one woman saying no could topple dynasties built on fear. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more threats, more revelations about the depths of Harrison corruption. The trials would be exhausting, the danger real, the cost measured in sleepless nights and constant vigilance. But tonight I'd spoken truth to power in a room full of citizens who believed me. Patricia had found her voice after 30 years of silence. Emma had chosen justice over family fortune. The prosecutor had been right. Integrity did bleed through, and apparently it was contagious. The Harrison Empire had ruled through fear. It would fall through courage, one testimony at a time. 6 months after Richard Harrison's birthday party ended in blood, I walked into the federal courthouse for the first day of his trial. My pregnancy showed prominently now, despite the conservative maternity dress Denise had chosen. The baby kicked as I passed through metal detectors, as if sensing the magnitude of this moment. The media circus outside had been overwhelming. Hundreds of reporters, cameras, and protesters lined the courthouse steps. Some held signs supporting the brave Harrison women. Others demanded justice for defrauded employees. Federal marshals had created a human corridor for witnesses, but the shouting still penetrated. Alesia, how does it feel to destroy a family empire? Will you let Jake see his child? What's your response to claims you planned this for money? I kept my eyes forward, one hand protective over my belly, letting the marshals guide me through the chaos. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere shifted to tense anticipation. The gallery was packed with victims, journalists, and curiosity seekers who'd won the lottery for seats at the trial of the decade. Richard entered in shackles, the orange jumpsuit a far cry from his tailored suits. 6 months in federal custody had diminished him. His hair had gone completely gray, his face gaunt, the commanding presence reduced to an angry old man. But his eyes still burned with hatred when they found me. Jake entered separately, his own trial scheduled for later. He'd lost weight too, his golden boy looks faded to prison pallor. Our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. He mouthed something that might have been, "I'm sorry," before his lawyer yanked him back. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Walsh. Judge Walsh commanded the room immediately. A small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, she had a reputation for suffering no fools and taking no bribes, which explained why she'd been assigned this case after 3 other judges recused themselves when their names appeared in Richard's blackmail files. The prosecutor, Michelle Rodriguez, opened with devastating simplicity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the government will prove that Richard Harrison built a criminal empire on the backs of honest workers, that he stole millions from pension funds while elderly employees faced poverty, that he brutally assaulted women who displeased him, including his own wife and daughter-in-law, that he corrupted judges, threatened witnesses, and destroyed anyone who stood in his way. This is not a complex case. This is about greed, violence, and a man who believed his wealth placed him above the law." Richard's lead attorney, the legendary Thomas Blackwood, countered with expected tactics. "My client is a successful businessman who made enemies through that success. You'll hear testimony from disgruntled employees, a bitter daughter-in-law seeking millions in divorce, and convicted criminals trying to reduce their own sentences. Ask yourself, where is the hard evidence? Where are the documents proving Mr. Harrison personally stole anything? This is a witch hunt against a pillar of the community." The first week established the financial crimes through mind-numbing detail. Forensic accountants explained Jake's algorithm, showing how it siphoned money so gradually that individual employees might lose only dollars per month, but multiplied across thousands of workers for 15 years, the theft was staggering. Emma testified on day 3, walking the jury through spreadsheets with the patience of a teacher. She showed how pension contributions vanished into offshore accounts, how Richard had signed every fraudulent transfer. When Blackwood attacked her credibility as a rebellious daughter with an agenda, she responded calmly, "My agenda is justice for the 800 employees who trusted their futures to our company. My father stole their retirements to buy yachts. If that makes me rebellious, I'll wear the label proudly." The emotional peak came when employees testified. The 60-year-old janitor, Marcus Washington, broke down describing how he'd worked nights for 25 years, saving for a modest retirement. "I missed my kids' bedtimes to clean those offices," he said through tears. "Missed school plays and basketball games, telling myself it would be worth it when I could retire with dignity. Now I'm 70 and stocking shelves at a grocery store because Mr. Harrison needed another vacation home. One by one, they told their stories. A widow whose husband died believing their pension was secure only to discover empty accounts. A diabetic who couldn't afford insulin after retirement funds vanished. Parents who'd promised college funds that no longer existed. Richard sat stone-faced through it all, occasionally whispering to his lawyers, but showing no emotion as life after life laid bare the human cost of his greed. Patricia testified on day 5. My mother-in-law had transformed during the months of preparation. Gone was the nervous woman who jumped at shadows. She sat straight-backed in the witness chair, speaking truth she'd swallowed for 30 years. The first time Richard hit me was 3 months after our wedding, she began. I disagreed with him at a dinner party. He waited until we got home, then backhanded me so hard I lost 2 teeth. He paid the dentist extra to stay quiet. She documented 3 decades of violence with clinical precision. Medical records introduced as evidence. Photos of bruises she'd hidden beneath designer clothes. The miscarriages caused by stress and violence, each lost baby, another secret buried in silence. "Why didn't you leave?" Michelle asked gently. "Where would I go? Richard owned everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts. He said if I ever tried to leave, he'd have me committed like his sister Catherine. I'd seen what he did to her. I believed him." When Blackwood suggested she was exaggerating for sympathy, Patricia pulled down her collar to show an old scar. 12 stitches, she said quietly, from a crystal decanter he threw at my head. Your client's signature is written in scars across my body. Would you like to see more? The judge had to call a recess as several jurors wept openly. My testimony came in the 2nd week. 7 months pregnant. I needed help getting into the witness chair. The baby kicked constantly as if protesting the proximity to Richard. I told the story simply without embellishment. The spilled wine, the backhand that split my lip, Jake's ultimatum, walking out into the storm rather than apologizing for someone else's violence. "He called you a stupid maid," Michelle prompted. "What went through your mind?" "That he finally showed his true face," I answered. For 5 years, I'd endured subtle insults, constant reminders that I wasn't good enough for his family, but hitting me in public in front of respected members of society. He believed his power was so absolute that he could assault me without consequences. "What did your husband do?" "He demanded I apologize, not to me for being hit, but that I apologize to Richard for bleeding on his shirt." Several jurors shook their heads in disgust. Blackwood's cross-examination lived up to his reputation. He painted me as a gold digger who'd planned to profit from divorce. When that didn't stick, he suggested I deliberately provoked Richard. "You were jealous of the Harrison wealth, weren't you?" "I was a pediatric nurse. I found purpose in healing sick children, not coveting yachts." "But you married into money eagerly enough." "I married Jake because I loved him. The money came with complications, not joy." Yet here you are seeking millions in divorce settlements. I've already stated all marital assets will go to employee restitution. I want nothing tainted by theft. He pressed harder, trying to shake my composure, but months of death threats and witness protection had given me steel. I answered each attack calmly, letting the truth speak louder than his insinuations. The security footage played on day 10. The courtroom fell silent as the video showed Richard's hand connecting with my face. The sound of impact echoed through speakers. Blood splattered across white linen as I stumbled backward. Even more damning was Jake's reaction caught in high definition. No shock at his father's violence, no move to protect his wife, just cold calculation before demanding I apologize. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michelle said as the video ended, "you've just witnessed assault in real time. Not alleged, not exaggerated, documented on video with 40 witnesses. This is who Richard Harrison is when he believes himself untouchable." William testified next, bringing boxes of evidence he'd collected over 20 years. Videos of other assaults, recordings of Richard bragging about bribing judges, documents showing the systematic destruction of anyone who opposed him. "Why did you stay silent so long?" Michelle asked. "Fear," William answered simply. "I'd seen what he did to others, but also purpose. I knew someday someone would stand up to him publicly. When that happened, I wanted ammunition ready. Mrs. Alesia Harrison provided that moment." The defense's case relied on character witnesses and technical arguments. Business associates testified to Richard's philanthropy, conveniently forgetting their own names appeared in his blackmail files. Experts argued the financial structures were legal if complex. No one could explain away the video of Richard striking me. Jake testified briefly, trying to minimize his father's crimes while maximizing his own cooperation. He claimed ignorance of the pension theft until recently, painting himself as another victim of Richard's manipulation. "Did you see your father strike your wife?" the prosecutor asked. "It happened very fast," Jake evaded. "I was shocked, trying to process." "Did you demand she apologize for being assaulted?" A long pause. "I was trying to de-escalate the situation. By threatening your pregnant wife to apologize or leave, I didn't know she was pregnant." "Would that have mattered?" Jake had no answer that wouldn't damn him further. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Margaret Winters took the stand. 20 years of suppressed rage poured out as she detailed Richard's attempted rape, her career's destruction, the blackmail that kept her silent. She produced the recording she'd kept Richard's younger voice filling the courtroom. "You think you can refuse me? I own this city. I'll bury you so deep your own mother won't remember your name. Take the money and disappear, or I'll destroy everything you've ever loved." Even Blackwood looked uncomfortable defending that. As week 3 began, the prosecution introduced evidence from Richard's hidden room in West Virginia. The breadth of his blackmail network stunned even hardened court watchers. Judges caught taking bribes, politicians in compromising positions, business leaders documenting their own crimes. Richard Harrison didn't just run a company, Michelle told the jury. He ran a criminal network that corrupted our entire city's power structure. He was untouchable because he made everyone else dirty too. The baby shifted constantly during these revelations, as if trying to distance itself from its grandfather's legacy. I rubbed my belly soothingly, whispering promises that this child would know better, be better. Richard finally took the stand in his own defense against his lawyer's advice. His arrogance wouldn't let others speak for him. He presented himself as a successful businessman persecuted by jealous inferiors and ungrateful family. "My wife is mentally unstable," he claimed. "She's fabricated abuse claims for attention. My daughter was always troubled, influenced by radical elements. My daughter-in-law saw an opportunity to cash in through divorce." Michelle's cross-examination was surgical. She played video after video of Richard's assaults, each contradiction destroying his credibility. "That's not assault, that's discipline." He insisted about hitting Patricia. "Discipline. Your wife is a 60-year-old woman, not a child. She needed correction. Like I needed correction for spilling wine. You deliberately sabotaged my birthday celebration. By saving Mrs. Pemberton from choking, by causing chaos and destroying my reputation." Michelle smiled coldly. "Mr. Harrison, do you believe you have the right to hit women who displease you? I believe in maintaining order in my household. Through violence. Through whatever means necessary." The jury's expressions said everything. Richard had just confessed to believing violence was acceptable, even necessary. His lawyers' faces showed they knew he'd just destroyed any chance of acquittal. Closing arguments brought everything full circle. The defense argued for reasonable doubt technicalities the successful businessman brought low by vindictive family. But Michelle's closing was masterful. Richard Harrison had everything: wealth, power, respect. But it wasn't enough. He needed control over employees whose futures he stole, over women whose bodies he viewed as property, over a city whose leaders he corrupted. For 40 years he ruled through fear. Then one woman said no. Alesia Harrison refused to apologize for his violence, and his empire, built on silence, finally crumbled. Ladies and gentlemen, you have the power. Richard Harrison believed he owned the power of justice. Use it. The jury deliberated for 2 days. I spent them in protective custody, feeling the baby perform gymnastics while Pittsburgh's future hung in the balance. Patricia stayed with Emma, finding strength in their shared survival. Jake remained in custody, his own trial looming. When the verdict came, the courtroom packed beyond capacity. Richard stood as a foreman read. On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty on all 67 counts. The words fell like dominoes, each one stripping away another piece of Richard's power. He swayed slightly, but remained standing, his face a mask of disbelief. This wasn't how his story was supposed to end. Judge Walsh scheduled sentencing for the following month. Richard would remain in custody. His reign of terror finally ended. As marshals led him away, Richard turned to stare at me one last time. The hatred in his eyes should have frightened me. Instead, I felt only pity. He'd had everything and thrown it away for the hollow satisfaction of controlling others through fear. Outside the courthouse, the media explosion was deafening. But through the chaos, I heard the cheers of Harrison Industries employees. Marcus Washington, the janitor who'd lost his retirement, stood in the front row. "Thank you," he called out. "Thank you for giving us justice." I nodded, unable to speak past the tears. Justice had come at a cost measured in threats and hiding, in a marriage destroyed and a family shattered. But seeing the hope in these faces, knowing their futures might be salvaged from Richard's greed, made every moment worthwhile. That night, in yet another safe house, I felt the baby settle into a calm rhythm for the first time in weeks. Perhaps it knew the worst was over. Richard would never hold this child, never poison another generation with his violence. The trial was over, but healing would take longer. Patricia had 30 years of trauma to process. Emma had a non-profit to build from her family's ashes. I had a child to raise alone and a life to rebuild. But tonight, we'd won. David had defeated Goliath not with stones but with truth. And sometimes that's all justice requires, someone willing to speak truth no matter the cost. The Harrison Empire had fallen. In its ruins, something better was already beginning to grow. The courtroom felt different on sentencing day. Where tension had reigned during the trial, now a sense of inevitable conclusion hung in the air. Richard Harrison sat at the defense table, his expensive suit, unable to hide the reality of his situation. 70 years old, convicted on 67 federal counts, his empire reduced to evidence tags and victim impact statements. I sat in the gallery's front row, 8 months pregnant, and feeling every moment of this journey in my bones. Patricia flanked my left, Emma on my right, 3 generations of Harrison women united not by blood, but by survival. The baby kicked sharply, as if demanding attention even now. "The United States versus Richard Allen Harrison," Judge Walsh announced. "We are here for sentencing following conviction on all counts. Does the defendant wish to make a statement?" Richard stood slowly, his movements, those of a man who still couldn't quite believe his circumstance. Even now, facing the consequences of decades of crimes, his arrogance remained intact. "Your Honor," he began, his voice still carrying that commanding tone, "I built an empire from nothing. I employed thousands, contributed millions to charity, helped make this city what it is today. If some accounting irregularities occurred, if some personal conflicts were misunderstood, surely 40 years of civic contribution outweigh these. Interpretations of events." Interpretations. Judge Walsh's voice could have frozen fire. Mr. Harrison, you were convicted by a jury of your peers based on video evidence, documented fraud, and testimony from dozens of victims. These are not interpretations. These are crimes. The prosecutor stood for the government's sentencing recommendation. Your Honor, Richard Harrison stole $37 million from employee pension funds. He physically assaulted multiple women, including his wife and daughter-in-law. He corrupted public officials and destroyed the lives of anyone who opposed him. The government requests the maximum sentence on all counts to be served consecutively. At 70 years old, this would constitute a life sentence, which is exactly what Richard Harrison deserves. The defense attorney made his plea for mercy, citing Richard's age, his charitable work, the businesses that had benefited from his leadership. It felt hollow, like praising an arsonist for previously watering some plants. Then came the victim impact statements. One by one, they approached the podium. Marcus Washington, the janitor, spoke of working nights while his children grew up without him, all for a retirement that vanished into Richard's offshore accounts. A widow described her husband's final months, dying while believing their pension would protect her, only to discover empty promises and poverty. Patricia took the stand, her voice steady despite decades of pain. Your Honor, Richard Harrison broke my bones, killed my unborn children through violence, and imprisoned me in fear for 30 years. But worse than what he did to me was what I allowed him to do to others by staying silent. Every employee he robbed, every woman he assaulted after me happened because I was too frightened to speak. Richard didn't just steal money. He stole lives, futures, hope itself. When my turn came, I needed help standing the pregnancy, making grace impossible. At the podium, I looked directly at Richard for the first time since the trial began. Your Honor, I was married to Richard Harrison's son for 5 years. In that time, I watched Jake transform from a kind man into his father's mirror. I stayed silent through insults, humiliations, and the slow erosion of my self-worth because I believed family meant enduring anything. Then Richard hit me for spilling wine. In that moment, I understood silence was complicity. I walked out bleeding because I refused to apologize for his violence. This child I carry will never know their grandfather. And that's not a loss, it's a liberation. Richard Harrison taught his family that power meant the right to hurt others. Today, justice teaches a different lesson. Emma spoke last, her words carrying the weight of a daughter's ultimate betrayal and redemption. I spent 25 years as Richard Harrison's daughter, watching him destroy anyone who showed weakness. He taught me to be ruthless, to view compassion as stupidity. It took courage. I didn't know I had to stand against him to choose justice over family fortune. But that choice freed me. Richard Harrison isn't just guilty of financial crimes. He's guilty of poisoning every life he touched, including his own children. The only mercy he deserves is that his reign of terror ends here. Judge Walsh called for a recess before sentencing. In the hallway, William approached our group. The former butler had aged years and months, the weight of his 20-year deception finally lifting but leaving him exhausted. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly, you 3 have already won. You broke the cycle. That matters more than any sentence. When court resumed, the gallery packed even fuller. Word had spread that Judge Walsh was ready to pronounce justice on one of Columbus's most powerful men. Mr. Harrison, she began, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely encountered a defendant who showed such complete disregard for law, morality, and human decency. You possessed wealth, power, influence, every advantage society could offer. You chose to use those gifts to steal, assault, and destroy. You corrupted our city's institutions, turned your family into accomplices or victims, and felt entitled to violence when challenged. The audacity of your crimes is matched only by your apparent belief that consequences would never find you. Richard's face had gone pale, perhaps, finally understanding that money couldn't purchase freedom this time. On the financial crimes alone, you deserve decades in prison. The systematic theft from workers who trusted their futures to your company represents a betrayal so profound it defies adequate description. But your physical violence elevates this beyond mere white-collar crime. You assaulted women for decades, including your own wife, believing your position placed you above accountability. The video of you striking your pregnant daughter-in-law for accidentally spilling wine encapsulates everything wrong with how you've lived your life. She paused, looking directly at Richard with the weight of judicial authority. Richard Allen Harrison, this court sentences you to 25 years for embezzlement and fraud, 15 years for racketeering, 10 years for assault and battery, and 5 years for witness intimidation. These sentences will run consecutively for a total of 55 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted. 55 years meant Richard would die in prison, would never again walk free to terrorize anyone. He swayed on his feet, his lawyer steadying him as the reality crashed down. Furthermore, Judge Walsh continued over the noise. All assets connected to your criminal enterprise are forfeited to the government, with proceeds directed to victim restitution. You built an empire on stolen futures, Mr. Harrison. It's fitting that empire's remains will attempt to restore what you destroyed. As marshals prepared to lead Richard away, he turned one final time. Not to me, not to Patricia or Emma, but to the gallery filled with his victims. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The predator, finally understanding how it felt to be powerless. "Dad," Jake's voice rang out from the back. My soon-to-be ex-husband had been brought to witness his father's sentencing before his own trial began. Their eyes met across the courtroom, two men who'd built their lives on exploitation, facing the ruins of their choices. "I'm sorry," Jake called out, though whether to Richard or the rest of us remained unclear. Richard said nothing, allowing the marshals to lead him away. The Emperor of Columbus disappeared through a side door, trading his tailored suits for prison orange, his corporate boardroom for a federal cell. The gallery slowly emptied, victims embracing tears of relief, mixing with lingering trauma. Marcus Washington shook my hand, with both of his weathered fingers gentle around mine. 55 years ago, he said in wonder. "He'll die in there." "Oh, yes," I agreed. "He will." Outside the courthouse, the media circus had reached fever pitch, but through the cameras and questions, I saw something that stopped me cold. A small group of Harrison Industries employees had gathered with a banner, "Thank you, Alesia, Patricia, and Emma. You gave us justice." Patricia broke down at the sight, 30 years of suppressed emotion finally finding release. Emma held her mother as she sobbed, not tears of sadness, but of freedom. The Harrison women had been defined by one man's violence for too long. Now they were defined by their courage in ending it. "What's next?" a reporter called out. "Healing," I answered simply, "and rebuilding lives free from fear." The FBI had one more surprise that afternoon. The forensic accountants had tracked down more hidden assets, $43 million in accounts Richard had hidden even from Jake. Every penny would go to victim restitution, starting with the pension funds. "It won't restore everything," Agent Coleman explained, "but employees will recover about 70 cents on every dollar stolen. It's not perfect justice, but it's more than most white-collar crime victims ever see." That evening, in what would be my last safe house before the threat level decreased, I video-called my parents. They'd aged during this ordeal, worry lines etched deeper, but their pride shone through the screen. "What's 55 years?" my father marveled. "He'll never hurt anyone again." "The baby?" my mother asked, ever practical. "Have you thought about the birth?" I had, constantly. Bringing life into the world while sending its grandfather to die in prison felt surreal, but this child would know love without conditions, success without cruelty, family without fear. "Patricia and Emma will be there," I said. "We've become our own family through this, a strange one bound by survival rather than blood, but stronger for it." Later that night, unable to sleep with the baby performing acrobatics, I stood by the window watching the city lights. Somewhere in Columbus, employees were learning their pensions might be partially restored. Somewhere women Richard had assaulted were processing the reality that their abuser would die in prison. Somewhere Jake sat in federal custody facing his own trial with the knowledge that Daddy couldn't save him anymore. A text from Emma interrupted my thoughts. Mom and I are planning a press conference tomorrow. We want to announce a foundation for domestic violence survivors using money from Mom's divorce settlement. Will you join us? I smiled, feeling the baby settle as if approving this new direction. Yes, let's build something good from the ashes. The Harrison Empire had fallen in spectacular fashion. Richard would die in federal prison unrepentant but irrelevant. Jake faced his own years behind bars. The corruption network Richard had cultivated was being systematically dismantled. But from the ruins, something new was growing. Patricia finding her voice after 30 years of silence. Emma using her business acumen for justice rather than exploitation. Me preparing to raise a child who would know their worth came from character, not bank accounts. Justice had been served in a federal courtroom measured in decades of imprisonment, but the real victory was simpler 3 women who'd refused to be silenced any longer, who'd chosen truth over comfort, courage over complicity. The verdict was in. Richard Harrison was guilty on all counts. But we were free. And that was the only judgment that truly mattered. The morning of Hope's birth arrived with spring rain pattering against hospital windows, washing the world clean for new beginnings. 6 months had passed since Richard's sentencing, half a year of rebuilding lives from the wreckage of the Harrison Empire. I gripped Patricia's hand through another contraction, her presence a comfort I never could have imagined during those suffocating family dinners. "You're doing beautifully," she murmured, dabbing my forehead with a cool cloth. The woman who'd once flinched from her own shadow had become my strongest support through the pregnancy. Emma paced by the window fielding calls from the foundation they'd established. "No, we need the shelter operational by next month. Domestic violence doesn't wait for convenient timing." Even in the delivery room, she remained a force of nature, channeling her father's drive toward healing instead of harm. Dr. Sarah Chen checked my progress with professional efficiency, softened by personal concern. "Almost there, Alesia. Your daughter's as eager to join the world as you were to change it." Between contractions, I thought about the journey to this moment. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, Jake accepting minimal visitation rights from his federal cell. He'd been sentenced to 8 years, his cooperation earning leniency the prosecutor had called generous considering his crimes. He'd sent 1 letter asking to be notified of the birth, promising to be a better father than his own. I'd thrown it away unopened. "Push," Sarah instructed, and I bore down with everything I had. Hope Amelia Morrison entered the world at 3:47 p.m., screaming her opinions with a volume that made everyone laugh. 7 pounds of perfect fury already fighting for her voice to be heard. I counted fingers and toes through tears, marveling at this tiny person who carried Harrison DNA but would never know their legacy of violence. "She's beautiful," Patricia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "May I passed my daughter to her grandmother, watching Patricia cradle Hope with infinite gentleness. 30 years of maternal instincts suppressed by survival bloomed in that moment. This child would know a different Patricia, one who'd found strength in truth rather than silence. Emma leaned over her tough exterior, cracking, "Hi, little warrior. Welcome to a better world than the one we knew." The next hours blurred together. Nurses checking vitals, Hope learning to nurse exhaustion competing with euphoria. My parents arrived from Columbus, my mother immediately commandeering baby-holding duties, while my father set up enough flowers to rival a funeral parlor. "She has your stubborn chin," he declared proudly. "This one's gonna change the world. Let's let her learn to hold her head up first." I laughed but privately agreed. Hope would grow up knowing her worth wasn't measured in bank accounts or social standing, but in the courage to speak truth when silence felt safer. That evening, as the hospital quieted, an unexpected visitor appeared. Margaret Winters stood in my doorway holding a small wrapped gift and looking uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I wanted to meet the next generation of women who refuse to be silenced." I welcomed her in this woman who'd waited 20 years for justice. She'd become something of a mentor through the trials her survival inspiring my own. Margaret approached Hope's bassinet with reverence. "She'll never know what we knew," Margaret said softly. "The fear, the silencing, the careful calculations of which battles we could afford to fight. She'll grow up believing her voice matters, because you proved it does." Her gift was a silver rattle engraved with a single word, fierce. "Every girl needs reminders of her strength," Margaret explained. Over the following days, the hospital room became a gathering place for unlikely allies. Marcus Washington visited bringing handmade booties his wife had knitted. For the little lady who helped get my retirement back, he said, refusing to acknowledge how his own testimony had been crucial. Female employees from Harrison Industries stopped by with cards and flowers, many sharing their own stories of survival. Hope had become a symbol of breaking cycles of futures, unmarred by the past's poison. William visited on day 3 looking healthier than he had during the trials. Retirement suited him, as did the satisfaction of seeing justice served. "Miss Hope," he said formally to my sleeping daughter, "I spent 20 years serving a family ruled by fear. Watching your mother walk out that night, blood on her face but freedom in her stride, was the bravest thing I'd ever seen. You come from courage, little one. Never forget that." The one visitor I didn't expect was Jake's mother from the other side of his family. Nancy Harrison had divorced Richard's brother decades ago, fleeing the family dysfunction. She'd reached out after seeing trial coverage, offering support I hadn't known existed. "I escaped when Jake was 2, she explained, holding Hope with practiced ease. "I tried to get custody, but the Harrison money buried me. I've watched from afar as my son became his father's creature. You did what I couldn't, you stood up to them publicly." "I had advantages you didn't," I said, echoing what I'd told Patricia months ago. "No," Nancy corrected firmly. "You had courage. That's different from advantages. That's character." We were discharged after 4 days, returning not to Denise's apartment, but to a small house I'd rented in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a garden where Hope could grow up feeling grass between her toes instead of marble beneath designer shoes. Patricia and Emma had transformed the nursery during my hospital stay. Soft greens and yellows replaced the neutral tones I'd chosen, bringing life to the space. A rocking chair sat by the window, where Patricia had already claimed grandmother duties. We might have gone slightly overboard," Emma admitted, gesturing to enough baby supplies to stock a small store. "It's perfect," I assured them, settling Hope into her crib for the first time. Those early weeks passed in a blur of feedings and diapers, exhaustion and wonder. Patricia stayed most days, her transformation continuing as she embraced grandmotherhood without Richard's shadow. She'd filed for divorce immediately after his conviction. Their 40-year marriage dissolved as easily as smoke. "I wasted so much time," she said one afternoon watching Hope sleep. "Decades of accepting the unacceptable, teaching my children that violence was normal, but maybe it's not too late. Maybe through Hope I can be the mother I should have been." Emma's foundation had taken off with unexpected momentum. Named Breaking Silence, it provided legal aid, safe housing, and counseling for domestic violence survivors. The bitter irony of Harrison money funding healing wasn't lost on anyone, but Emma embraced it as justice. "Dad stole futures," she explained to a reporter. "We're trying to restore them." 3 months after Hope's birth, an unexpected legal development arose. The FBI had finished prosecuting the corruption network Richard had cultivated, resulting in 23 additional convictions. Judges, business leaders, and politicians face their own reckonings. But more importantly for us, the asset recovery had exceeded expectations. We've located an additional $17 million in hidden accounts, Agent Coleman informed me, all proceeds from criminal enterprise, all subject to victim restitution. The pension fund victims would receive nearly full restitution, a rare victory in white-collar crime. Marcus Washington called crying when he learned his retirement was restored. "I can quit the grocery store," he sobbed. "I can finally rest." Jake wrote again when Hope turned 4 months old. This time, I read it. Alesia, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I failed you in every way a husband could fail a wife. I chose my father's approval over your safety, wealth over love, silence over truth. I'm in therapy here, mandatory, but also necessary. I'm learning things about myself I don't like but need to face. The other inmates know what I did, not the financial crimes that earns respect here, but abandoning my pregnant wife after she was assaulted. That marks me as the lowest kind of coward. They're right. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I think about Hope every day. Not with any claim to her, I forfeited that right, but with hope that she inherits your strength, not my weakness. If she ever asks about me, tell her the truth, that her father was a weak man who chose wrong at every turn, but who hopes she'll be everything he failed to be. I'm signing away all parental rights. It's the only gift I can give her, freedom from the Harrison legacy. Let her be a Morrison. Let her be yours alone. Let her be free, Jake. I sat with the letter for a long time, Hope babbling in her bouncer beside me. Did I believe his remorse? Did it matter? He was offering the one thing I needed, complete severance from his influence. The papers arrived a week later, and I signed them without hesitation. Hope would know her father's name when she was old enough to understand, but she'd know it as a cautionary tale, not a presence in her life. Some cycles could only be broken through distance. As Hope grew, so did our strange family. Patricia officially moved to Columbus, buying a modest home near mine. She volunteered at the foundation, her lived experience invaluable to women, just beginning their escape from abuse. Emma and Maria got engaged on Hope's first birthday, the celebration doubling as an announcement of their commitment. Richard would have raged at his daughter's happiness. We simply cheered and passed the cake. To chosen families, Emma toasted raising her champagne as Hope smeared frosting in her hair, and to little girls who will grow up knowing love doesn't require conditions. The Harrison estate had been sold to developers who turned it into condominiums, erasing the physical monument to Richard's reign. I drove past once needing to see the transformation. Where manicured gardens had hidden violence, children now played on swing sets. Where crystal had shattered against walls, families shared ordinary dinners. The address remained, but the poison had been excavated. My nursing career had evolved too. The hospital created a position for me, developing protocols for domestic violence identification and support. My story had become, unfortunately, famous, but if that fame helped one woman recognize danger signs and escape, the exposure was worth it. You've saved 12 lives this year, Sarah Chen told me during my annual review. 12 women who might have stayed silent without your protocols, your visibility, your proof that survival is possible. 12 women who wouldn't apologize for someone else's violence. 12 families spared generations of trauma. It wasn't enough, it would never be enough, but it was a start. Hope took her first steps in Patricia's living room, stumbling between her grandmother and Aunt Emma with determination that made us all laugh. She'd inherit their eyes, but not their fears, their intelligence, but not their silence. This child would grow up believing her voice mattered because we'd proven it did. Ma Hope declared her first word clear and strong. I scooped her up, this miracle who'd emerged from nightmare. Yes, baby, Mama's here. Mama will always be here. Patricia watched us with tears flowing freely, no longer afraid to show emotion. Emma snapped pictures, building the family albums we'd never had before. Not portraits of perfection, but snapshots of reality, messy, loud, complicated, and absolutely free. The Harrison Empire had fallen 18 months ago, triggered by spilled wine and refused apologies. In its place, something infinitely more valuable had grown, a family bound by choice, rather than blood strength, rather than wealth, truth, rather than silence. Hope would carry the Harrison DNA, but not their legacy. She'd know her worth came from character, not bank accounts. She'd understand that real power meant lifting others, not crushing them. She'd believe her voice mattered because 3 generations of women had proven it did. The rebirth was complete. From ashes of empire, a garden of hope had bloomed. And in that garden, a little girl named Hope took her first steps toward a future unmarred by the past's poison, proving that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well freely and without apology. 2 years had passed since the night I walked out of the Harrison estate with blood on my lips and freedom in my heart. Hope toddled through the park on sturdy legs, chasing butterflies with the single-minded determination that reminded me why I'd chosen her name. Spring had returned to Columbus, and with it a sense of renewal that ran deeper than seasons. "Mama, look." Hope pointed at a particularly bold cardinal, her vocabulary expanding daily. "Red bird." "That's right, sweetie, red bird." I smiled, adjusting the picnic blanket where Patricia and Emma waited with lunch. We'd established these Sunday gatherings as our new tradition, replacing the suffocating country club brunches with simple meals in public parks. No pretense, no performance, just 3 women who'd survived the same storm, finding peace in each other's company. "Letter came yesterday," Emma said, passing me an envelope. "From Jake." I recognized the federal prison postmark, but felt no familiar dread. Jake wrote monthly now, not to me, but to a trust fund he'd established for Hope from his remaining legitimate assets. The letters went to Emma as trustee updates on his progress in therapy and education programs. "He's completing his MBA," Emma continued. "Says he wants to teach business ethics when he gets out. The irony isn't lost on him." "Good for him," I said, meaning it. Jake's journey wasn't my concern anymore, but I hoped he'd find redemption for Hope's sake, if nothing else. A father rebuilding himself from prison was better than one who'd never acknowledged his failures. Patricia spread photos across the blanket, images from the Foundation's latest success. The Toledo shelter opened last week. That makes 7 across Ohio. By year's end, we'll have 10. Breaking silence had exceeded every projection. Patricia's divorce settlement and donated Harrison assets, creating a network of support for domestic violence survivors. Each shelter bore the same inscription: "Your voice matters, your story matters, you matter." "Any word from the FBI about the remaining assets?" I asked. Emma grinned. "Another 4 million recovered from shells within shells. Richard was paranoid enough to hide money from his hidden money. It's all going to victim restitution." The numbers had become staggering. Nearly 60 million returned to pension funds, another 20 million funding shelters and legal aid. Richard's empire of greed had transformed into an infrastructure of healing, poetic justice measured in restored retirements and saved lives. Hope wandered back, clutching a dandelion-like treasure. "For Gamma," she announced, presenting it to Patricia with toddler solemnity. Patricia accepted the weed like diamonds, tears threatening her carefully applied mascara. "Thank you, precious girl. It's beautiful." These moments still caught her off guard, the simple affection Richard had beaten out of their family, slowly returning through Hope's innocent love. Watching Patricia bloom into the grandmother she'd always wanted to be was its own form of justice. "Tom's coming for dinner Tuesday," I mentioned casually, though Emma's knowing smirk suggested I'd fooled no one. Tom Chen was Sarah's brother, a single father I'd met at the hospital's pediatric wing. His daughter Lily was 6 months older than Hope, and they'd become fast friends at daycare. What started as playdates had evolved into family dinners and cautious exploration of something deeper. "He's good for you," Patricia said simply. "Kind without weakness, strong without cruelty. Everything Richard pretended to be, but never was." "It's still early," I protested but couldn't hide my smile. "Two people who understand that love shouldn't hurt raising daughters who'll never question their worth." Emma raised her juice box in mock toast. "I'd say that's worth exploring." My phone buzzed with a news alert. Richard's name in headlines still made my stomach clench, though the news was always the same: appeals denied, health declining, the empire's emperor dying slowly in federal custody. This time was different. Richard Harrison, disgraced Columbus business leader, dies in federal prison at 72. I read it twice, waiting for some emotion that didn't come. Not satisfaction death brought no victory. Not sadness he'd burned away any sympathy long ago. Just emptiness, a chapter finally closing with anticlimactic finality. "He's gone," I told the others quietly. Patricia's hand found mine. "How do you feel?" Free," I answered honestly. "He's been gone from our lives for 2 years. This just makes it official." Emma pulled up the full article on her phone. "Died in his sleep. No suspicious circumstances. His lawyers requesting burial in the family plot, but the cemetery boards refusing. Too much vandalism risk." Even in death, Richard had become too toxic for a respectable society. The man who'd ruled Columbus through fear couldn't find 6 feet of ground that would accept his remains. There was a lesson in that, though I was too tired to parse it fully. "Will you tell Hope someday?" Patricia asked, watching her granddaughter collect more dandelions. "When she's older, when she can understand that people are complicated, that DNA doesn't determine destiny, that her grandfather's failures don't define her future." I pulled Hope into my lap, inhaling her sunshine scent. "But not today. Today she's just 2, and cardinals are miracles and dandelions are precious gifts." The foundation held a board meeting that evening, the shelter directors video calling from across Ohio. Each had stories of women rebuilding children, healing cycles, breaking through the simple act of providing safety and support. "We house 847 women and children this quarter," the Cleveland director reported. "That's lives saved, futures restored." Patricia ran the meetings with quiet authority, her transformation from victim to advocate complete. She'd testified before the state legislature twice, pushing for stronger domestic violence protections. The woman who'd hidden bruises now showed her scars to change laws. "Richard died today," she announced at meeting's end. "I wanted you all to hear it from me." Silence greeted the news, then one by one the directors began to speak. "He can't hurt anyone else. The survivors in our care are safe from him forever. May his victims find peace." Not celebration, but acknowledgement. Richard's death meant nothing to women fleeing other abusers, but symbolically, the monster who'd inspired breaking silence could terrorize no more. The foundation would outlive its origin story, and that was the only monument that mattered. Tom joined us for dinner as promised Tuesday night, bringing Lily and his mother's homemade dumplings. Watching him parent with patience and humor, seeing how he treated Hope with the same gentle respect as his own daughter, feeling the ease of conversation without calculating every word, it was everything marriage to Jake hadn't been. "I know you've been through hell," he said later after the girls were asleep. "I'm not asking you to forget that or pretend it didn't happen. I'm just asking for the chance to show you that some men understand. Love is a verb, not a possession." "I have baggage," I warned. "A complicated, past a daughter whose grandfather died in federal prison, a story that made national news. And I have a daughter whose mother left when she was 6 months old, parents who still think I failed as a husband, and my own share of scars." He took my hand carefully, telegraphing the movement so I could pull away. I didn't. Maybe two people with baggage can help each other unpack. Patricia babysat when we went on our first official date, shooing us out with firm instructions to stay out past 10. I raised two children under Richard's thumb, she said. I know how to grandparent with joy now. Go. Be young. Remember what happiness feels like. Happiness. Such a simple word for such a complex emotion. But sitting across from Tom at a quiet restaurant talking about everything and nothing, laughing at bad jokes and shared parenting disasters, I remembered. This was happiness connection, without fear, attraction without power games, possibility without predetermined outcomes. I'm glad you hit back, Tom said unexpectedly over dessert. That night, when Richard hit you, I'm glad you didn't apologize, didn't minimize, didn't accept it as the price of belonging. My sister told me the whole story. You saved a lot of lives by refusing to be silent. I was just angry, I admitted, and pregnant and tired of shrinking myself to fit their expectations. Anger can be holy when it drives us toward justice, he said. You turned yours into shelters and restored pensions and 3 women free from violence. That's not just anger. That's alchemy. 6 months later, Tom and I stood in the same park where Hope fed dandelions to her grandmother, exchanging vows in front of the people who'd become family through choice rather than law. Nothing fancy, Patricia had learned the poison of perfect parties. Just promises made in sunshine, 2 daughters as flower girls, and the knowledge that second chances could bloom from scorched earth. I promise to love you without conditions, Tom said, his voice steady, to respect your strength without trying to contain it, to raise our daughters knowing their worth comes from character, not compliance. I promise to trust without fear, I replied, meaning every word. To build a life based on truth rather than appearances, to show our girls that love multiplies when divided among chosen family. Hope and Lily threw flower petals with enthusiasm that sent guests ducking their giggles, the only music we needed. Patricia officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for this moment. Emma and Maria stood as witnesses, their own wedding planned for fall. By the power vested in me by the internet and the state of Ohio. Patricia concluded with a smile that would have been impossible 2 years ago. I now pronounce you husband and wife. May your love be modern enough to survive the times and old-fashioned enough to last forever. The reception was potluck in the shelter's community room, survivors and supporters mingling over homemade dishes. Marcus Washington had brought his famous cornbread, insisting on catering despite our protests. William attended with his wife, finally free to socialize without serving. Even Nancy Harrison came, Jake's long-estranged mother, finding family in unexpected places. Jake sends his congratulations, she told me quietly. He's genuinely happy you found love again. How is he? I asked, surprising myself with sincere curiosity. Better. Therapy is working. He teaches literacy to other inmates, says helping them find their voices helps him understand how he silenced yours. 4 more years, but he's already a different man than the one who went in. Maybe people could change. Maybe Jake would emerge from prison as the man he should have been. Maybe Hope would someday know a father worthy of the title. Or maybe not. Either way, our lives moved forward without waiting for his redemption. As evening fell, I stood with Tom watching our daughters dance with Patricia and Emma, chosen family, creating joy from ashes of the old. The Harrison Empire was gone, Richard dead and unmourned, Jake rebuilding himself in federal custody. But the women who'd survived had transformed pain into purpose, silence into shelters, bruises into blueprints for better lives. No regrets? Tom asked, pulling me close. I thought about it honestly. Regret for the years lost to Jake's family. No, they'd led me to hope. Regret for the pain suffered. No, it had forged strength I hadn't known I possessed. Regret for the empire's fall, never its destruction, had freed hundreds. No regrets, I confirmed. Only gratitude for where the journey led. Hope ran over Lily close behind, both demanding uppies from their parents. We lifted them, these girls who would grow up believing their voices mattered. Their choices counted, their worth was inherent rather than earned through compliance. The story. Hope requested her new favorite bedtime stall tactic. "What kind of story?" I asked. "Brave story, like you, Mama." I smiled, kissing her forehead. Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought being good meant being quiet. But she learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak your truth even when your voice shakes. The story could wait for bedtime. For now, we swayed to music only we could hear, two damaged people who'd built something whole, two daughters who'd never questioned their right to happiness, and the family we'd chosen, rising like spring flowers through pavement cracks. The Harrison dynasty had ruled through fear. We'd replaced it with something stronger: love without conditions, family without violence, future without fear. The full circle was complete, and in that completion, we found not an ending but a beginning of lives lived freely, voices raised fearlessly, and love given generously to all who'd earned it through kindness rather than commanded it through cruelty. In the distance, church bells rang the hour, but they sounded like freedom. They sounded like hope. They sounded like home. 5 years had passed since I walked out of Richard Harrison's birthday party with blood on my lips and revolution in my heart. On this crisp October morning, I stood in the renovated Harrison estate, now transformed into Hope House, preparing to address a crowd that included survivors' supporters and the women who had become my family through shared survival. The mansion's cold marble had been replaced with warm hardwood, where crystal chandeliers once threw harsh light on hidden bruises. Soft fixtures now illuminated walls covered with children's artwork. The dining room that had hosted Richard's final birthday party now served as a communal kitchen, where survivors learned to nourish themselves and their children free from fear. "Mama, is this where the bad grandpa lived?" Hope asked her 5-year-old mind, trying to reconcile the bright, welcoming space with the stories she'd begun to understand. "Yes, sweetheart, but we made it better. Now it's a place where people come to feel safe." She nodded solemnly, processing this in the way children do, simply and profoundly. Good beats bad if you're brave enough. "Yes, baby, good beats bad if you're brave enough." Tom appeared at my shoulder, Lily beside him, in a matching dress to Hope's. Our blended family had grown seamlessly, the girls more sisters than friends. He'd officially adopted Hope last year, giving her the father she deserved while maintaining honest conversation about her biological parentage. "They're ready for you," he said, squeezing my hand. "The room's packed. Media survivors, even some state legislators, Patricia strong-armed into attending." Through the French doors, the same ones I'd fled through that night, I could see the gathering. Patricia stood near the podium, elegant in purple, the color of survival. She'd grown into her role as foundation president with grace that emerged only after violence ended. Emma and Maria flanked her, the power couple using their business acumen to expand breaking silence into a national movement. William was there, no longer serving but attending as an honored guest. Marcus Washington had brought fellow Harrison Industries retirees their pensions restored, their dignity intact. Sarah Chen represented the hospital's domestic violence program we'd built together. Even Nancy Harrison attended, representing the family members who'd escaped Richard's orbit long before it imploded. "You ready?" Tom asked. I thought about the journey to this moment. The divorce finalized with Jake signing away all rights. The trials that sent Richard to die in prison and Jake to find redemption behind bars. The shelters built, lives saved, cycles broken through the simple act of refusing silence. "I've been ready for 5 years," I said. The crowd quieted as I approached the podium. Hope House's logo, a phoenix rising from ashes, displayed prominently behind me. In the audience, I spotted unexpected faces. Judge Walsh, who'd sentenced Richard, Agent Coleman, whose thorough investigation had unraveled decades of corruption, the prosecutor, Michelle Rodriguez, who turned my bruises into federal convictions. But mostly, I saw survivors, women who'd fled with nothing but their children and their courage, teenagers who'd aged out of violent homes, elderly ladies who'd finally found strength to leave after decades of abuse. Each face a story, each story of victory over someone who'd tried to silence them. 5 years ago, I began my voice carrying across the space that had once echoed with Richard's rage. I stood in this house as Richard Harrison's daughter-in-law. I left as a survivor with blood on my face and freedom in my heart. Today, I return as proof that violence doesn't have to be our inheritance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. This estate once symbolized power built on fear, wealth accumulated through theft, family bonds, maintained through violence. Richard Harrison believed his money gave him the right to hit his wife, assault his daughter-in-law, and steal from the very employees who built his success. He was wrong. I paused, meeting Patricia's eyes. She nodded encouragement, this woman who taught me that survival sometimes looked like silence, until it could safely become speech. Today, Hope House opens its doors as the 15th shelter in the Breaking Silence network. Where violence once reigned, safety now blooms. Where silence was enforced, voices are heard. Where Richard Harrison once declared me a stupid maid for spilling wine, survivors now learn they are worthy of respect, love, and lives free from fear. The crowd erupted in applause. Through the noise, I heard Hope cheering, "That's my mama!" When quiet returned, I continued. Richard died in prison, unmourned and unforgiven. But his victims we lived. Patricia Harrison survived 30 years of abuse to become a voice for change. Emma Harrison chose justice over family fortune. Hundreds of employees saw their stolen futures restored, and I learned that sometimes the hardest blow we take becomes the one that sets us free. I gestured to the renovated space around us. Every room in this house once held secrets. The dining room where blood spattered white tablecloths, the study where Richard planned his frauds, the bedrooms where Patricia hid bruises beneath designer clothes. Now those rooms shelter women and children rebuilding their lives. That's not just renovation, that's resurrection. Movement near the entrance caught my eye. A young woman entered tentatively, a split lip, fresh and swollen, a toddler on her hip, and fear in her eyes. The shelter's first official resident arriving as I spoke. The timing felt orchestrated by forces greater than coincidence. Patricia noticed too immediately, moving to welcome her. I watched my former mother-in-law embrace this stranger with the gentleness learned through shared suffering, and my throat tightened with emotion. "That," I said, pointing to the new arrival, "is why we're here. Every woman who walks through these doors carries a story of survival. Some fled after the first blow. Others endured decades before finding their courage. But each one made the same brave choice. They chose themselves over someone else's violence." The audience watched as Patricia led the woman to a seat, volunteers, already mobilizing with water tissues and the quiet efficiency of those who understood crisis. Richard Harrison taught his family that power meant the right to hurt others. Today, we teach a different lesson. Power means the ability to heal. Strength means lifting others. Success means how many people you help rise. I looked at my daughters in the front row, Hope and Lily, 5 and 6, too young to fully understand, but old enough to absorb the truth that they mattered. Their voices counted, their bodies were their own. To those still trapped in violent homes hearing this and wondering if escape is possible, it is. To those who think they must choose between poverty and abuse, you don't. To those who've been told they're worthless so many times they've started to believe it, you're not. Your voice matters. Your safety matters. You matter. The new resident was crying silently, clutching her child. I saw myself 5 years ago fleeing into a storm with blood on my face. I saw Patricia 30 years ago hiding broken ribs beneath silk blouses. I saw every woman who'd been told her pain was the price of belonging. Breaking silence has helped 3,847 women and children find safety in the last 5 years. We've restored $23 million to pension fraud victims. We've changed laws, challenged systems, and proven that one woman's refusal to apologize for someone else's violence can topple empires built on fear. Emma stepped forward with a ceremonial ribbon and scissors. "Will you do the honors?" she asked. I accepted the scissors, but called others forward. "Patricia, this is your house to reclaim. William, you kept the evidence that made justice possible. Marcus, you represented every employee whose future was stolen. Join me." Together, we cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted as Hope House officially opened, transforming a monument to abuse into a beacon of hope. As people toured the facilities, marveling at playrooms where Richard's office once stood at the commercial kitchen where his wine cellar had been, I found myself in the garden where I'd fled that night. The storm-damaged landscaping had been replaced with vegetable gardens tended by residents' playground equipment where children could safely play. Tom found me there, Hope and Lily running ahead to test the swings. "You did it," he said simply. "We did it," I corrected, all of us who refused to be silent. Jake had sent a letter through Emma timed to arrive today. I debated reading it, but curiosity won. His handwriting had changed, become more careful, more deliberate. "Alesia, I know I have no right to pride in what you've accomplished, but I'm proud anyway. You turned my family's legacy of violence into a movement of healing. You gave our daughter a father who deserves her through Tom while showing mercy by letting her know her biological father's name without hatred. I graduate next month with my counseling degree. The warden has approved my proposal to run survivor support groups here. Perhaps I can help other men understand what I learned too late, that real strength means protecting, not hurting those we claim to love." I folded the letter carefully. Jake's redemption was his own journey separate from mine, but knowing Hope's biological father was trying to become better, even from prison, eased something I hadn't known was still tender. "Miss Alesia." The new resident approached hesitantly, her toddler hiding behind her legs. "I just wanted to say thank you. I saw you on the news 5 years ago, walking away, bleeding but not broken. I thought if you could leave after one hit, maybe I could leave after so many. You saved my life before you even knew I existed." I embraced her, carefully mindful of injuries visible and hidden. "You saved your own life by walking through those doors. I just proved it was possible." As sunset painted the sky, the opening celebration wound down. Survivors headed to their new rooms, volunteers cleaned up, and the Harrison estate settled into its new identity as a place of healing. Patricia, Emma, and I stood in the foyer where Richard had once held court, now transformed into a welcoming reception area. "He would hate this," Emma said with satisfaction. "Every single thing about it." "Good," Patricia replied firmly. "His hatred was poison. This is the antidote." I thought about Richard, 2 years dead in a prison grave, unmourned and unremembered except as a cautionary tale. His empire had crumbled, his legacy erased, his very name transformed from symbol of power to synonym for abuse, the ultimate justice irrelevance. But we who survived had become relevant. Our voices shaped laws. Our stories saved lives. Our refusal to be silent echoed through courtrooms and shelters, proving that courage was contagious and healing possible. "Mama, look," Hope called from the doorway. "The sun's making everything gold." She was right. The setting sun bathed Hope House in warm light, transforming even this place of former darkness into something beautiful. My daughter stood silhouetted in the doorway, strong and sure and unafraid, living proof that cycles could be broken, that genetics weren't destiny, that love without conditions could heal wounds generations deep. I joined my family, Tom Hope, Lily Patricia, Emma Maria, and all the chosen relatives who'd emerged from shared survival. Together, we watched the sun set on the old Harrison estate and rise on Hope House, knowing tomorrow would bring new residents, new challenges, new chances to prove that good beats bad if you're brave enough. Story time. Hope asked our nightly ritual. "What kind of story tonight?" I asked. "The real one, about the woman who wouldn't say sorry for someone else's meanness." I smiled, gathering both girls close. Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought keeping quiet kept her safe. But she learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak your truth even when powerful people want you silent. And when she spoke up, she discovered she wasn't alone. The story would continue tomorrow and the next day and all the days after. Stories of survival, shared in support groups, testimonies that changed laws, whispered encouragements between women who understood that leaving was possible because someone else had done it first. Richard Harrison had ruled through fear for 40 years. It had taken me 40 seconds of bleeding defiance to begin his empire's fall. But the real victory wasn't in his destruction, it was in what we'd built from the ruins. Shelters providing safety, voices demanding justice, children growing up knowing their worth was inherent, not earned through compliance or silence. As we prepared to leave Hope House to its new residents and staff, I paused at the door where I'd once fled into a storm. The security camera that had captured Richard's assault had been replaced with a sign. "Welcome to Hope House. Your voice matters here." I touched the words lightly, remembering blood and fear and the moment I chose myself over a toxic family's approval. That choice had rippled outward, touching lives I'd never meet, saving women I'd never know, breaking cycles that had seemed eternal. Behind me, my family waited, patient, loving, whole. Before me, the future stretched bright with possibility. And in that moment, standing between what was and what could be, I knew the truth. Sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with one woman saying, "No more." And sometimes the best revenge against those who tried to break you is to build something beautiful from the pieces, then spend your life helping others do the same. The Harrison Empire had fallen. In its place, hope had risen. And that hope had a name, a face, and a future that belonged to all of us who'd refused to be silenced any longer. Dear viewers, thank you for joining me on Alesia's journey from violence to victory. If you've ever faced abuse, know that your voice matters and help exists. If this story touched you, please help. This story reach others who need to hear that survival is possible. Subscribe. Join our community for more stories of triumph over adversity. Remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and worthy of love without conditions. May you find your voice, speak your truth, and build something beautiful from whatever tried to break you.